Chapter 152. Windsor was the second one to go up. After the battle with the demons, Windsor felt like he had been reborn. Especially in terms of experience against large enemies, he and the elite soldiers who came back from Karazhan had extraordinary strength that surpassed ordinary elites. He thought he could do it. Although he was surprised by the bravery of this red-skinned orc who was different from the other orcs, he still raised his shield and charged forward. The king's protector, in his right hand, emitted a piercing cold light. He had underestimated Orgrim. Windsor could not have known that he was facing the future chief of the Horde. In this period of time, the #1 warrior of the Horde, and even in history, it was Orgrim who personally killed the Azeroth lion Anduin Lothar in the final battle. If he knew that this was not an opponent he could deal with, he might have used a completely different strategy. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in life. From his point of view, anyone who used heavy weapons would definitely be slow, clumsy fellows that were full of openings. So, he charged forward at high speed. Windsor was wrong, very wrong. After Orgrim smashed the royal guard to death with his hammer, the muscles on his arms suddenly swelled. On his exposed skin, red veins snaked out like a dragon's beard. That was a force beyond the imagination of mortals. Orgrim's hammer of destruction bounced up on its own and swept towards Windsor like a storm. Boom! Although Windsor was holding a shield and the hammer hit the shield, the terrifying force of a giant, measured in tons, was not something a mortal could defend against. Windsor's left arm was instantly deformed, and there were many fractures. The huge force even injured his lungs. After he was sent flying, he was already bleeding from his mouth and nose before he even landed on the ground. He was on the verge of death. Behind Orgrim, the ferocious orcs killed all the standing human warriors in the hall like they were chopping vegetables. Between the Wooden Queen and Orgrim, there was only Varian, who was trembling and holding a dagger in his hand. A tear finally rolled down the Queen's beautiful face. It was pitiful and heart-wrenching. Orgrim walked over with his hammer on his shoulder. Every step he took made the ground shake. "You're the woman of the human great chief?" Orgrim spoke in orc language. The Queen didn't understand everything, but after interacting with Garona a while ago, she at least understood the word, Great Chief. The Queen puffed out her chest and said in fluent human language, "I am the Queen of Stormwind. If you want my husband's life, I'm sorry, but he's on his way. But if you want to kill me and my child, you can do it now." Orgrim did not understand the human language, but he admired the courage of this human female. Not only her, but also that human brat. From the initial timidity, he found his courage amidst extreme fear. Even though the little guy was only holding a dagger, Orgrim knew that the little guy was about to attack. "Ah!" William roared as he rushed forward and stabbed his dagger. However, it was of no use. The brave Varian was flicked away by Orgrim's finger. No, there was no longer a barrier between his most respected mother and that cruel orc. He couldn't imagine how that cruel and terrifying orc would treat his mother. Either outcome was something that William didn't want to see. "Is there anyone else? Is there anyone else? Who can save my mother? Save Stormwind?" William's young but handsome face contorted in pain. Tears flowed down his face as he bawled. All he could see were women and children. They were all cowering in fear, trying to delay the arrival of death. He actually prayed to this group of people in despair? William was in despair. He almost gave up and shouted, "Uncle Anduin, aren't you the guardian of the kingdom? Brother Duque, aren't you the super mage who's going to surpass Medivh? The kingdom is in danger. My mother is in danger. Where are all of you?" Although he didn't understand, Orgrim had a mocking expression on his face. Just as he was about to say something, a magical radiance suddenly lit up in front of him. "Yo, who called me just now? Is it you? Your Royal Highness." A male voice with a hint of mockery suddenly sounded in the air and echoed in the hall. Orgrim hated magic. But at this moment, he kind of wished that there was a shaman or even a warlock by his side. A bright blue radiance flashed, and a young man wearing the mage robe of the Royal Mage Legion of Stormwind suddenly appeared. He stood between the Queen, William, and Orgrim. Unexpectedly, the moment he opened his mouth, The young man actually spoke in the standard orc language. Orgrim Doomhammer, this is not a place you should be. Get lost. The thunderous roar stunned Orgrim. The next second, the man raised his right hand high, and a spiraling flame storm immediately swept towards all the orc warriors standing near the entrance of the hall. Dragon breath? How could there be such a large-scale dragon breath? The roaring flame dragon almost filled the 6-meter-wide and 10-meter-tall entrance of the hall. Even William, who was behind Duque, could feel the terrifying power of the flames that could incinerate everything. Not to mention Orgrim, who was facing this heavy blow. Without any hesitation, Orgrim directly smashed his hammer on the floor. From the cracks in the marble floor, a destructive flame that was completely different from the dragon breath collided with the dragon breath. That was the power of the Doom Hammer. When the two forces collided, Orgrim actually managed to block it for a moment. But in the next moment, the young mage stretched out his left hand and made a horse stance. A huge azure arcane energy fist that was taller than a human appeared out of thin air. It passed through the flames of the dragon breath and smashed into Orgrim's body. Wu, caught off guard, Orgrim was directly sent flying. Go back to where you came from. The rest of the orcs were directly burned into charcoal, and the entire hall was filled with the unpleasant smell of burnt flesh. For a moment, the entire throne room was silent. Who was this young mage from the Royal Mage Legion? After fighting for so long, the Royal Mage Legion was almost dead. There used to be more than 100 of them, but they were completely at a disadvantage against the orc warlocks. Only a mere 20 of them were still alive. The queen recognized every single one of them, and she clearly remembered that they were all brought to the southern outer city wall by Lang. Who is he? Chapter 153. Looking at the familiar face, a name came to the queen's mind. She suddenly remembered that Anduin had seriously mentioned that Duque's face had matured because of the curse. Could he be Duque? The queen asked. Duke turned around and smiled. I'm very happy that you still remember me after my appearance has changed so much, Your Majesty. But now is not the time to catch up. Let me deal with the orcs first. It really was Duque, but she did not expect him to change so much. Not only did he look more mature, but he had also grown 10 centimeters taller. He was now 8 meters tall. Without giving the queen and the starry-eyed noblewomen time to think, Duque raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. Under the control of his pure mana, a strong gust of wind suddenly swept up in the large throne room, sweeping away all the smell of blood and burnt flesh. The next second, the freezing aura spread at a speed visible to the naked eye. Every corpse turned into a snow-white ice sculpture in an instant. The horrifying aura in the throne room was gone. Master, I'm sorry Windsor coughed blood and tried to stand up. Duque pressed Windsor down with magician's hand. He frowned and turned his head. Is there a priest in Storm Fortress? Yes, my personal priest is in the side hall, a 13-year-old girl suddenly said. Then I'll have to trouble you. With a strong enemy in front of him, Duque did not pay attention to this doll-like noblewoman. Duque came to the huge corridor and saw Orgrim, who stood up without a care. Human, how do you know our language? Orgrim asked in orc language. Garona taught me. Garona? That traitor? Orgrim bared his teeth, his face full of disdain. Just ask her about the Shadow Council. Don't make things difficult for her, Duque warned. You have no right to order me around. Orgrim roared angrily. Duque didn't mind. Orcs are all blockheads that don't learn their lesson if they don't get beaten. Come on. The second round. Duque crooked his finger at Orgrim. Ha! Orgrim suddenly sped up. Orgrim firmly believed that he was caught off guard earlier. This fellow in front of him was not a terrifying spellcaster at all. Beastmen often had amazing intuition. He was different from Gul'dan, who felt like he was being corroded to death just by standing next to him. Even though Duque had a shocking amount of mana, Orgrim instinctively felt that Duque's mana was far from Gul'dan's. If that's the case, I can win, Orgrim told himself. He soon found out that he was wrong. Perhaps, once he got close, Duque would be a piece of cake. However, Duque's actions were completely different from his youthful appearance. Shockwave was unleashed. A ring-shaped ring of flames with a powerful impact easily repelled Orgrim's attack. However, Duque could clearly see that the flames couldn't do anything to Orgrim. The system elf reminded Duque, "Be careful. Orgrim has a high resistance to fire." Duque's eyelids twitched. It made sense. Orgrim was one of the top beastmen, and his body was almost at the level of a saint. Back then he had jumped into a fire pit with Black Hand, swam in lava, and snatched Doomhammer back. How could Orgrim's resistance to fire not be high? It was like a firefighter wearing a high-tech fireproof suit. The flames couldn't do much damage to Orgrim. Curling his lips, Duque suddenly changed his approach. He reached out with both hands, and every time he raised his hand, a giant blue hand filled with arcane energy would fly towards Orgrim. Arcane spell. With this attack, Duque suddenly realized that Orgrim's resistance to arcane spells was also quite high. This gave Duque a headache. But it didn't matter. Whether it was punches, slaps, or middle finger flicks, it looked like he was trying to tease Orgrim, but in reality, both sides knew that the power of those giant hands was continuously increasing. 1 meter, 2 meters, 10 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters. Orgrim didn't expect that he would be forced back by Duque again and again in the long corridor of the storm fortress. The pain didn't stop, but none of the wounds were fatal. Of course, this was only against Orgrim, who had thick skin and amazing resistance to magic. When he ran into other beastmen who didn't have high resistance to magic, Duque would just kill them with a single spell. Behind Duque, some brave ones like the little prince ran to the door of the hall to watch. They all stared blankly at Duque, who seemed to be taking a leisurely stroll out of the hall. With every few steps, he cast a spell and killed those hateful beastmen who invaded the fortress with the same clean and efficient method. Unknowingly, they were mesmerized by the stalwart figure of Duque's back. Which teenager didn't worship heroes? Which girl didn't admire heroes? Once upon a time, the object of their admiration was Anduin Lothar. Now, this name had silently changed to Duke Marcus. The Queen quietly walked behind Prince William and placed her hands on his shoulders. Remember, William, only those who bravely stand up in times of danger are true heroes. Whether it's Duque or those warriors who fell to protect us, they are all heroes. Yes. William nodded his head heavily. Orgrim was extremely aggrieved. He roared and roared continuously, using battle techniques one after another in an attempt to get close to Duque. However, he couldn't do it at all. The long corridor made it difficult for him to attack in a single direction. He had no chance to avoid Duque's large-scale attacks at all. It was like a cat trying to catch a mouse, but the cat was being played by the mouse like a bug. As long as the terrain changed, Orgrim was confident that he could go around it and give the human who spoke the beastman language a blow. Even when Orgrim was beaten out of the storm fortress, he still didn't have such an opportunity. Duke furrowed his brows. His arcane impact had already stacked up to 8 times, but the damage done to Orgrim hadn't increased at all. Both the system notification and the feedback he received from his own magic proved this point. Orgrim had a very abnormal physique. He seemed to be able to adjust his body to create resistance to certain elements or spells. To be honest, it wasn't that Duque didn't have a chance to kill Orgrim. However, it was obvious that Duque would need a long time to exhaust Orgrim to death. To Duque, there was no beastman he couldn't kill. Firstly, Orgrim wasn't a fool. He would run away if he saw the situation wasn't looking good. Secondly, if he killed him now, it would affect Duque's plan. Hence, Duque held back like an adult beating his own child. Injuring him but not killing him was what Duque did. Chapter 154. Human. Tell me, why did you hold back? Orgrim was keenly aware of this, and he felt insulted. Another heavy magic strike sent Orgrim Doomhammer flying into the square in front of the storm fortress. Duque stood at the gate and sneered, "I'm not interested in you, who can't fight without your full strength." At this time, many of Orgrim's subordinates broke away from the crazed human warriors and charged towards Duque. "Don't go there." Orgrim suddenly realized and tried to dissuade his subordinates. It was too late. Orgrim was a rare exception. He didn't drink the demon's blood, so he had the traditional reddish-brown skin of the beastmen. His subordinates weren't. The demon's blood made them more powerful, but also more violent and irrational. They didn't listen to Orgrim's roar, and instead, they rushed forward in a fit of passion. In the distance, the galloping King Leon and Bolvar saw this scene from the other end of the street that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Circular magic circles unfolded on both sides of Duque. The magic circles rotated clockwise in an orderly manner, and purplish-blue lines filled with arcane energy expanded along the magic circles, quickly forming mysterious patterns. At the same time, more magician's hands appeared around the magic circles like stars in the sky. In the eyes of outsiders, Duque suddenly spread out a pair of huge magic wings that were more than 50 meters long. With a light flap of the wings, the river in front of the storm fortress that ran through Stormwind City was immediately turned upside down by Duque's magic power. The tall waves formed a waterspout that many people wouldn't see in their entire lives. Su-su, an ear-piercing whistle sounded. The water arrows that were like a torrential downpour turned into ice javelins that were as lethal as sharp steel weapons the moment they left the tornado. They rained down on the orcs that were charging at them madly. Orgrim was stunned. This was the first time he had seen such a large-scale magic. Against such a terrifying spell, even Orgrim had to swing his hammer with all his might to deflect the incoming icicles. He could withstand it, but what about his subordinates? Countless screams converged into one. In the blink of an eye, at least 200 valiant orcs were nailed to death in the square in front of the fortress. Just like how they had tortured and killed the human warriors in the beginning, they were now the ones being tortured and killed. This human mage's strength had completely exceeded his imagination. Orgrim tried to think of a way to kill this young human mage. However, what was the point of killing this mage? In the distance, the thunderous sound of horse hooves could be heard, causing the stone tiles on the ground to tremble slightly. Orgrim turned his head and saw spears raised high into the sky from the south. The shining tips of the spears carried an indescribable sense of ferocity. Orgrim recognized that it was one of the few enemies that the beastmen were unwilling to face head-on, the human cavalry. Under the huge momentum, the spear's penetrative power was something that even the strongest orcs were unwilling to face head-on. The leader was wearing a dazzling golden helmet and armor. His dazzling attire made him look like a flag. Every knight beside him and behind him was equally anxious and angry. Orgrim recognized him. This was the great chief of the human race. He knew that this battle was over. Orgrim was not too depressed. He made a chewing motion with his jaw. The failure of this ambush was not important. The human city's weakness had been found. If he could lead his men to cross the mountain once, he could do it 10 times or even 20 times. The weak defense here was nothing compared to the hard bones at the front. Orgrim glared at Duke, who was still standing at the entrance of the storm fortress, looking like he could hold the fort against 10,000 enemies by himself. "Human, tell me your name." Orgrim roared with the hammer of destruction in his hand. Duke Marcus." Duque smiled and replied in orc language. "I will remember you." Orgrim said fiercely. "Of course you have to remember me, because I will become your nightmare." Duque's smile was filled with a strange mystery that Orgrim could not understand. With a strong enemy approaching, Orgrim did not have the time to bicker with Duque. To the orcs, true victory was always reflected on the battlefield, and not through meaningless insults. "Retreat!" Orgrim raised his warhammer and roared. The remaining orc warriors gave up on fighting the humans and began to retreat towards the direction of the Stormwind Fortress. Duque wanted to give chase. In Duque's eyes, only a dead orc was a good orc. But an accident disrupted Duque's plan. Not far behind him, the young Prince Varian ran out without a care for his life. "Use the javelins to attack that human kid." Orgrim did not miss the opportunity to order a suicide squad to cover their retreat. Unlike Duque's exquisite javelins, the orcs, who had suffered greatly due to the lack of javelins on the battlefield, had also developed a relatively heavy weapon, a javelin that was simply sharpened from a tree trunk. It looked ugly, but it became extremely dangerous with the orc's astonishing arm strength. Duke had no choice but to grab William and summon an ice wall to block the spears that were hurled at him. Phew! Duke sighed. If Varian had stayed inside and not come out, he could pretend that he did not see it. But now that Varian had come out, he could not possibly bring the only precious son of King Lang to chase after the orcs. Varian also knew that he had messed up, and looked at Duke with an uneasy and fearful gaze. Duke raised his index finger to his lips and said, "Sure, I will answer your father's questions later. Otherwise, you will be spanked when you return." The young prince quivered and nodded continuously. The golden lion head painted on the flag of Stormwind was getting closer and closer. Looking at Lang, it was as if he was looking at the late king who had led the kingdom's people to this valley 1,000 years ago. Duke stood quietly at the entrance of Stormwind Fortress and watched as Lang galloped towards him. Lang jumped off the horse before it could even stand still. "Oh, my God! Varian, you're all right. Where's your mother?" Lang, who was over 40 years old, had never shed a tear when his country had fallen, nor had he shed a tear when the enemy was at the gates of the city. But now tears were flowing down his face, and he cried like a child, sincere and pure. "Mother is fine." But the next moment, Lang raised his arm and was about to slap him. "Damn it, you almost killed Count Marcus." A magic hand gently pulled Lang back. "I'm sorry, the guards inside have all died in battle. I can't possibly let the only heir of the kingdom stay in danger," Duke said shamelessly. Chapter 155. A faraway world was in danger of being destroyed. A close family member was in danger of dying. Which one had the biggest impact on his heart? Of course it was the rescue of his close family member. Without experiencing the incomparably dangerous battle in Karazhan, Lang wasn't as emotionally and intellectually grateful to Duke, but it wasn't as impactful as this time. Unknowingly, Duke's youthful figure had already overlapped with the Mediv in Lang's mind. The same wisdom, the same kindness, the same reliability, and the same saving at the most crucial moment. Nianhua would grow old. How many more years would he and his good friend Noxus be able to stay strong? Duke was different. Not only was Duke talented and powerful, but he was also only 15 years old. Even though he was partially cursed by Sargeras, Duke was still 18 or 19 years old. If he could become a pillar of Stormwind, then William wouldn't have to worry about problems in the field of magic or even business for a long time. For a moment, Lang's heart was burning with eagerness. Unfortunately, there was still one more pressing matter that had to be dealt with. Where did those damned orcs come from? This made Lang's heart very painful. Not only was it because all the defenses at the South Gate were useless, but it also meant that Stormwind City's fall had entered a countdown. Without the fortifications, the ratio of casualties between humans and orcs of the same level was 3-1. This was also the ratio of professional soldiers who had received long-term military training. Those farmers who were still plowing the fields a few months ago, even if they were fully armed, would at least have a ratio of 10-1 when they encountered the orcs. There were less than 70,000 soldiers left in the entire kingdom. And the orcs? The latest report said that there were at least 400,000 orcs. This was a terrifying number that wouldn't be enough even if all the people in Stormwind were to be stuffed into it. King Lang's face twitched. He turned his head and ordered, "Luther, bring some people to kill the orcs, at least until they reach the city walls. Andrew, get your people to take over Stormwind Fortress and clean up the orcs in the fortress. Jamacha, get the city guards to clean up the orcs." Then, Lang turned his head and said to Duque seriously, "Thank you very much, Duque. Although I would like to promote you to a duke immediately, we have more important things to do now. I really need your opinion. From today onwards, I hope you can attend every military meeting." Duque bowed slightly. "It is my honor, Your Majesty. I'll be waiting for you in the meeting hall of Storm Fortress in an hour." Ryan patted Duke's shoulder and hurried off to meet his queen. Duke knew very well that from this moment on, he had truly become the core of the entire Storm Kingdom. This time, Fortress was the core of Stormwind Fortress, he said. It was because of Stormwind, not Orc. Duque clear. Stormwind, especially this time, if it wasn't for Duke, the core of Stormwind City, Stormwind Fort, would have been occupied by the elites of Orgrimmwood. Then, they would have worked together and Stormwind would have fallen today. Of course, all Duque did was repel the orcs' surprise attack. Next time, he wouldn't be so lucky. Even so, there were corpses everywhere, and houses that had been burned down everywhere. The orcs' half-an-hour invasion had caused great damage to Stormwind Fortress. It wasn't just physical damage, but also mental damage. At that moment, Duque could still hear the screams of the people in the distance. Stormwind Fortress has fallen. Stormwind Fortress has fallen. However, this wasn't Duque's concern. Just as Duque was about to go check on Windsor, another group of Stormwind soldiers rushed over. They looked no different from the other soldiers of Stormwind City, but Duke noticed that the insignia on the left side of their chests was a black insignia. In the middle of the insignia was the skull of the Grim Reaper with a hood, and beside the skull were countless mage hands faintly appearing. Isn't he one of my people? Duque was stunned, but he soon realized that the leader was his head butler, Makarov. Sweeping his gaze across, Duque found many familiar faces. The mercenaries that followed him to the western wilderness were all at least captains. Master! Makarov's position was high in the eyes of outsiders, but in front of Duque he was still the small mercenary leader. He remembered clearly that all his glory came from the master in front of him, the mysterious Sea King Duque. Without Duque, he would always be the useless mercenary leader. Why you dressed like this? We're officially your private soldiers, Master Marcos. However, Stormwind City is in danger, and you're not here. People like us with combat experience have been temporarily recruited by Lord Lothar. Lord Lothar promised to let you go once you return. Duque smiled. He didn't care about such a small matter, not to mention that the one ordering them around was Lothar. Windsor is heavily injured. Makarov, go get the best priest in Stormwind City in my name. The rest of you, follow young Makarov to clean up the remaining orcs. Half an hour later, Makarov's life was saved after being personally healed by the Archbishop of Stormwind City. The priest's healing spells were very effective against physical injuries, and even internal injuries could be healed. Of course, the essence of healing spells was to use divine power to stimulate the human body's potential. Healing came at the cost of the human body's potential. Simply put, it was a reduction in lifespan. Without the present, there would be no future. Everybody knows about this. In front of the sickbed, the pale Windsor looked at Duque with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, Master. Am I useless? I couldn't even block a single blow from that guy. Duque laughed. Windsor was still young. He was loyal and not lacking in courage, but he was far from the hero of the future who had an iron will and was unafraid of death. If you knew that the red-skinned orc with the square mace was called Orgrim Doomhammer, and that he was the strongest warrior of the tribe, would you feel better? Really? Windsor was a little surprised, but his eyes immediately dimmed. Damn it, I'm secretly happy that I lost to the strongest. This proves that my training is still lacking. Duque was also amused. Come on, in the entire kingdom, apart from Lothar, there's really no one who can fight him fairly. Not even you, Master? Duque pondered for a moment. If there's no interference, give me at least half an hour, and I have about a 50% chance of killing him. Duque added in his mind, that's on the premise that I can't revive. Out of the blue, Windsor asked, is Stormwind Kingdom destroyed? Stormwind City will fall, and Stormwind will be reborn after defeating the orcs. Chapter 156. Panic was still spreading endlessly. The capital of the country was invaded, and even the Storm Fortress, which was integrated with the palace and the fortress, was lost for a time. Even if the invaders were quickly annihilated by the Sea King Duke who arrived in time, it still couldn't stop the fear in the hearts of the people from growing. We don't want to die. We want to live. Please, let me and my child board the ship. His Majesty Lang can no longer defend Stormwind City. Does he want us to die with this useless king? Pessimism spread like a plague, and it could not be suppressed. A large number of people dragged their families to the port, begging for a ticket to a safe world. The people who had lost their minds did not listen to the explanation of the port officials and tried everything to rush onto the ship. There were even people who wanted to rush onto the ship when they saw the ship docked, even before the military supplies were unloaded. The scene was extremely chaotic. Facing their own people, the guards of Stormwind City who were in charge of maintaining order did not dare to use their swords. With a moment of carelessness, a large number of people rushed onto the port after some conspirators shouted, "The city has been breached." If it were not for the following scene, there might have been a tragic stampede of casualties. A strong gust of wind suddenly blew, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold air from the pier. Everyone could clearly feel the terrifying power contained in this cold wind. A small part of the sea suddenly froze, and a huge iceberg rose from the ground, getting taller and taller. A young man wearing the robes of the Stormwind City Royal Wizard Squad stood on it. Wizard? It's actually a wizard? Oh my god! He's Sea King Duque. The name "the" seemed to have some mysterious magic power that surpassed the power of magic. As soon as the name came out, the people who were in a frenzy suddenly calmed down. Whether it was out of a natural fear of the wizards in the mysterious realm, out of admiration for the young wizard who had become a giant in the kingdom, or out of respect for the hero who was the king of demons Sargeras, the people stopped what they were doing. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at the legendary young mage standing on the ice mountain with complicated and fearful gazes. Duque didn't explain anything first. He raised his hand, and a lot of hands of magic that emitted white fluorescence suddenly appeared. They flew into the crowd like lightning and dragged several guys out. What are you doing? Let me go. Let me go? Mages are killing indiscriminately. Is there still any law? These ruffians struggled violently, but in the face of the mysterious magic power, their struggles were meaningless. Duque's mocking sneer spread in all directions. Didn't you have a good time shouting, "The city is breached" just now? Why aren't you shouting? Just by observing with the naked eye, it was impossible to find these fellows who harbored ill intentions. However, with the help of the system elf, he was able to find it easily. Of course, this would be attributed to the mysteriousness of mages by the people. Everyone's minds suddenly shook, and they immediately realized that it was these fellows who had seized the opportunity to cause trouble. Bastard! You actually lied to us? Liar! The crowding just now almost trampled my son to death. The people were naive, and seeing that there was nothing serious happening, a group of bastards came to fan the flames. They were all furious, and their attention was successfully diverted by Duque. In the next instant, Duque's hands of magic grabbed the necks of these fellows who had been caught in the air. Duque raised his hand, and a gold-edged scroll appeared in his hand. Now, I will read the urgent imperial order of His Majesty Wang Lin. In view of the fact that the beastmen have found a flaw in Stormwind's defense, I have decided to evacuate the people by sea to South Shore in the north in the next month in an orderly manner. Anyone who disturbs the order, behead. Earl Duke Marcus has the final right to interpret the order of all maritime transport. In fact, the imperial order was real, and the kind-hearted Lang didn't use such harsh words. In a time of great chaos, Duque just used a heavy punishment. Gently putting away Lang imperial order, Duque turned his cold gaze to the few troublemakers. According to His Majesty Rin's imperial order, you are now sentenced to death. With a snap of Duque's fingers, a dozen hands of magic directly dismembered these weak fellows in midair. In the next instant, all the corpses didn't even fall to the ground. They were directly frozen into a huge ice sculpture, thundering into the sea closest to the dock. As long as one walked on the dock, one could clearly see the tragic deaths of these gangsters through the transparent ice surface. Immediately, Duque waved his hand, and the radiance of arcane magic divided the crowd into a dozen or so huge horizontal lines. Now, everyone, line up with the 7 arcane radiances on your body: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple, and go to the designated dock official to receive the evacuation tickets. Anyone who disturbs the order of the dock, you'll end up like these gangsters. Don't even think of deceiving my mage's eyes. With my eye of heaven, Anyone who sneaks onto the ship will be thrown into the middle of the sea to feed the sharks. With that, hundreds of strange, mage's eyes, suddenly appeared in midair, blinking and blinking. Everyone felt like they were being seen through. Under Duque's deterrence, and under the supervision of the city guards who had regained their toughness, the people unknowingly returned to order. On the balcony of Storm Fortress, Lang and the Queen looked towards Storm Harbor, listening to the noise coming from afar. In their noses, the smell of blood from Storm Fortress, which had just begun to be cleaned up, was still extremely strong. The elite orc soldiers under Orgrim's command had not only killed a large number of Imperial guards, but also many reliable servants and maids. This made the cleaning of the corpses and the fortress very slow. Lang's furrowed brows were almost dripping water. "My dear, I'm afraid I'm going to lose this kingdom." Lang's brows were filled with gloom. This was the first time since the start of the war that he personally admitted that his kingdom might perish. The Queen grasped Lang's large hands tightly. "At least you still have me and William, loyal subjects like Anduin, Bolvar, and Duque. There are so many soldiers who trust you, and the people. There was a clear sadness in Lang's eyes. "Any rational person would know that this is not your fault. Duque is right. This should be a crisis that the 7 human kingdoms are facing together. My dear, it's so good to have you." After kissing his lover, Lang turned around and entered the fortress. Then he received news that Duque was dealing with the problem at the harbor. Regarding the following report, Lang only said one sentence. "Got it." Chapter 157. Lang waited in silence for 10 minutes. When he knew that Duque had arrived, he came to the meeting hall and began the military meeting. Those nobles who had been clamoring before the start of the Battle of Stormwind City, even if there were millions of orcs, they would all die under Stormwind City, were all silent. Unsurprisingly, the topic changed from how to exhaust the orcs to how to evacuate. Evacuating was not an easy task. Even though women and children had been evacuated a few months ago, it was not that they did not want to evacuate, but there were simply not enough ships. No one blamed Duque. Without Duque, the situation might have been even worse. The simplest example was the new Stormwind port, which had a stone pier that extended all the way to the sea. Compared to the previous narrow military port and the fisherman's pier, the shipping capacity was more than 10 times greater. And shipping capacity, no one knew what Duque was thinking. Almost all the ships directly under Duque's command were typical large cargo ships. They did not even need to be modified, and could be used directly to carry people and goods. The spacious cabin and good ventilation made it like a can of sardines stuffed full of people, but there was still no major problem. Unfortunately, considering the distance, no matter how much the ships were overloaded, they could only transport about 5,000 people a day on average. At this moment, there were still more than 300,000 soldiers and civilians trapped in Stormwind City. It was no exaggeration to say that almost all the ships in the human world were here. Even if Stormwind Port and the shipyards of Kurtiras worked overtime to build ships, there would not be much increase in shipping capacity in a short period of time. The shortage of shipping capacity was the biggest problem in front of Lang. In history, Stormwind was also hit hard because of this reason. After Lothar's raid on Karazhan, because the orcs were advancing faster than in this world, all the roads were blocked. Lothar did not return to Stormwind City. When he rushed back, Lang had already been killed by Garona in a secret underground meeting hall under the witness of the little prince, Varian. Without a leader, and with the rubbish in the port, there were not enough ships. As a result, when Stormwind City was attacked by the Horde, more than 80% of the citizens who could not escape in time were slaughtered. Lothar brought less than 20% of the citizens of Stormwind and the orphans and widows left behind by Lang to South Shore. With no soldiers, no manpower, no weapons, and no supplies, Lothar was almost at the end of his rope. That was how Lothar, as a direct descendant of Thoradin the Great, announced that he would give up the throne of Thoradin the Great in exchange for the formation of an alliance to fight against the invasion of the Horde. In this world, with the existence of Duque, the course of history had been greatly changed. At the very least, Lang was still alive, and more than 300,000 citizens had been transported to South Shore. Regardless of whether Stormwind had lost just like in history, it was obvious that they had managed to preserve their vitality in this life. Due to the large number of citizens and the fact that Duque had sent people there early on to prepare for large-scale construction, there were voices of dissatisfaction in both the kingdom of Riptide Fortress and the Alterac kingdom. They suspected that the people of Stormwind had come here and refused to leave. King Lang knew very well that Duque had reached his limit. However, evacuation was not something that could be done at will, nor was it a simple mathematical problem. 300,000 divided by 5,000, which was exactly 60 days to evacuate. Wishful thinking. Hundreds of thousands of orcs were eyeing the city covetously. Once the city was breached, all the remaining people would be instantly surrounded like dumplings, and no one would be able to escape. Only those who had evacuated in the first few days would be truly safe. The later it was, the more dangerous it would be. Now, including all the militia and city guards, there were at most 90,000 people. It sounded like a lot, but once the battle started, it would only take half a day to kill all of them. Stormwind City can no longer be defended. For the continuation and future of the kingdom, we unanimously suggest that the Honorable Queen and Prince William should evacuate first. Several dukes stood up together and were the first to advise. Upon hearing this, Noxus snorted coldly. Why should the Queen and the Prince evacuate first? Isn't it just because the mother and son don't evacuate, and you cowardly fellows don't dare to violate the taboo and evacuate first? If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. If the upper beam is upright, the lower beam will be crooked. Even if the upper beam is crooked, the lower beam will be crooked. With the Queen and the Prince here, the nobles didn't even dare to ask about evacuating their children. Now that Storm Fortress had almost fallen, it was the best excuse for them to do so. Lang glanced at these nobles, but none of them dared to really meet Lang's burning gaze. After pausing for a moment, Lang still said, "Yes, all noble women, first-in-line heirs of the family, those who don't hold military positions, or those who are underage can evacuate together with the Queen and the Prince. Don't worry, in a situation where a bloody battle to the end is meaningless, I won't ask you to defend to the end with me." Lang's reply made the nobles really happy and angry at the same time. They were happy that Lang finally relented, giving their children an excuse to escape. They were angry that Lang still didn't allow any desertion. Stormwind had been a country for 1,000 years, relying on military merits to protect their titles and military merits to advance. That was why the nobles, in order to let their children stand out, racked their brains to think of ways to get a job in the army. There was even the matter of the Brando kid who had a conflict with Duque taking credit. Now, Clayan had blocked off their escape route with a single bite. Except for a few who had a grand reason to flee, the rest would have to live and die with the king. Those who had arranged for their children to escape in advance were naturally secretly delighted. Those who weren't so smart now looked like they had just eaten arsenic as a snack. Ignoring these guys, Lang focused on another important issue. "Noxus, if I give you the entire city's combat power, how many days can you defend Stormwind?" Noxus thought for a moment. With that 16-foot 5-meter high wall? If the orcs use that as a breakthrough point, 10 days no more. And we need at least 30,000 people to cover their retreat. This army will definitely be wiped out. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a commotion among the nobles. Almost everyone had their own thoughts. Lang turned his head to Edwin Van Cleef, who was sitting next to Duque, looking a little uneasy. "Van Cleef, if I ask your men to urgently build 50 archery towers and catapults over 20 feet high at the east wall, can you do it? If you can, how many days will it take?" It was the first time he had attended such an important military meeting, and Van Cleef was extremely nervous. His back was completely soaked in cold sweat. At this moment, he heard Duque's voice. "Don't be nervous, answer truthfully. The wise king will not vent his anger on you." Chapter 158. After receiving the affirmation from Lang and Duque, Van Cleef took a deep breath. To be honest, Sir Duque doesn't have much cement left. One of the important materials for cement comes from the Ungoro crater. We used Sir Duque's funds to collect it, But we only bought about 100 tons from the Stranglethorn Valley's Goblin Venture Capital Company. That's all they have in stock. The remaining materials are only enough to make 30 catapults or 80 arrow towers, and it will take at least 10 days. Nobles were not very knowledgeable, cultured, cultivated, and noble people. Apart from the strict etiquette training and the ability to read and write, the nobles in this era were no different from most ordinary people. Their geographical knowledge was limited to the nobles in the southern part of the continent. They did not realize that the Ungoro crater was on the other side of the sea, far away on another continent. Trash. If it's 10 days, the soldiers of Stormwind City would have been killed. On the opposite side, a duke slammed the table and rose to his feet, his angry voice almost frightening Van Cleef. Van Cleef was not the Van Cleef who was forced into a dead end in the future. At this moment, he was just a follower of Duque who was born as a stonemason. He did not even have the chance to determine how much trust and support Duque had in him. It was like a duck being driven onto a perch. The Duke did not expect that Duque would go against him for the sake of Van Cleef, a lowly dog. He slammed the table and Duque slammed it even louder. Bang! Almost all the guards of the Wang family thought that the enemy was attacking. Every guard put their hands on the hilt of their swords. When they saw that it was Duque slamming the table, they secretly let go of their hands again. You're the trash. You don't even know that the Ungoro crater is on the other side of the sea, and you're talking nonsense to my people. If there really was so much cement, I would have raised the entire wall of Stormwind City to 200 feet high. Orcs can't even fly in, let alone climb. Duque was telling the truth. In this world without modern industry, it was too difficult to make proper cement. The only thing they could do was to use volcanic ash as the main raw material for cement. That was why he had his eyes on the Ungoro crater and asked Van Cleef to collect materials through various channels. The truth was the most hurtful. Obviously, Duque was scolding people, but many people were amused by Duque's counterargument. This kind of direct scolding of the other party's ignorance, and it even hit the mark. The resulting laughter made the Duke feel even more embarrassed. Another Duke stood up and said, "Very well, I would like to ask Sir Lothar, how long can you defend with these towers?" Lothar raised a finger. "The limit is 1 month and it's still the same thing. The troops in charge of the rear won't survive." All right, let's go back to the original question. No, not back to square one. Duque interrupted the Duke. "It's just 10 days. I'll fight for it." Duque patted Van Cleef on the shoulder. "You can rest assured and let your men do their job." For some reason, Van Cleef felt like crying. In his impression, the nobles were all in cahoots with each other. There is nothing that cannot be solved by the exchange of interests. This was a famous saying among the nobles. For a moment, Van Cleef thought that the noble Earl Duque would not stand up for a lowly person like him. He was a duke. Duque did not feel anything, but Van Cleef did not. Van Cleef, whose ancestors had been in Stormwind City for generations, had a natural fear of high-ranking nobles, who knew that not only did Duque speak up, but he also made the other party half dead. Suddenly, Van Cleef had the urge to die for Duque. Now, not only did Duque take all the blame, but he also protected him. Tears welled up in Van Cleef's eyes. Not many people cared about Van Cleef's emotions. Everyone's attention was on Duque's words. 10 days? Are you sure? The sand in the hourglass is more expensive than gold. We are in a race with death. King Lang kindly reminded Duque. "Oh, thank God. If you can do it, Duque, it will be a great help." Lothar, who had worked with Duque more often, was almost blindly optimistic. He did not know how Duque did it, but based on his understanding of Duque, he was sure that Duque would not make empty promises. Lang looked at the restless nobles and frowned. "What are you going to do?" The second Duke was obviously a little against Duque. In front of His Majesty's minister, no matter if it's for comfort or other reasons, lies are meaningless. Right now, we are discussing the lives and deaths of nearly half of Stormwind. We cannot allow a brat like you to speak big words. He was the king, and if necessary, he could force Duque's proposal through. But before that, it would be best if he could convince everyone. Duque stretched his body and leaned comfortably on the bench. He crossed his fingers and placed them on his abdomen. It seems that your people think differently from you. Last night, your butler found my subordinate, Makarov, and said that he wanted 2 more ships to transport your treasures. If you don't believe me, why did you find my subordinate? Everyone knew that Duque was putting 2 and 2 together. Believing that Duque could stall the orcs for 10 days and believing in Duque's fleet were 2 completely different things. But either Duque's political intelligence was 0, or Duque was doing it on purpose. At this time, he told Lang that it was these vermin who wanted to disregard the lives of Lang's most cherished citizens and empty the precious cabins to transport the treasures. Almost at the same time, Lang, Lothar, Bolvar, and the other upright and outspoken nobles all had dark expressions. Ugh, oh, there's such a thing? Impossible. The Duke immediately denied it, but he immediately realized that he could not fool him. I've been busy with military affairs recently. Perhaps there really is such a thing. If there is, I will definitely punish that butler. He actually dared to use our noble name to do such a dirty thing. Count Marcus, don't change the topic. Whether you can stall for 10 days is related to the survival of the entire kingdom. That poor butler would most likely become a scapegoat. After all, beating his dog was also a slap to his face. Duque did not care. He already had his own ideas about the nobles of Stormwind. Of course, the topic returned to the most important matter, the 10th day. It's very simple. Since the elven forest has already been occupied by those greenskins, then I'll just burn half of the forest. The moment Duque's voice fell, the entire place fell into a deathly silence. Everyone sucked in a cold breath. Duque was really daring. Chapter 159. As the most basic territory of the Stormwind Kingdom, the Elven Forest had always been a treasure in the eyes of the nobles. Not only did agricultural activities such as logging and rearing pigs and sheep allow the people to live a stable life, but it also brought continuous tax revenue to the nobles' territories. In addition, the Elven Forest itself had a large number of high-grade copper and other mineral resources. The Elven Forest was almost synonymous with not having to worry about food and clothing. If it wasn't for the thousands of years that every inch of the forest had been transferred by successive kings, no fool would spend so much effort to develop the barren Red Ridge Mountains in the east, the dark Twilight Forest in the south, or the monster-infested western wilderness. In the meeting hall, everyone's first reaction was that Duque had gone crazy. They instinctively wanted to deny Duque. Their second reaction was that it seemed to make sense. What happened to the Elven Forest? Did it have anything to do with them now? Not at all. No matter how much they denied it, they couldn't change the fact that the Elven Forest had fallen into the hands of those damned greenskins. The rich natural resources of the past had all become resources for the greenskins to raise their descendants. Thinking of their beautiful mansions and rich territories falling into the hands of those barbaric beasts, every noble gritted their teeth in hatred. One of the nobles asked weakly, "Won't we anger the druids by setting fire to the forest?" Then, a group of nobles looked at the small noble as if he was an idiot. They were facing a disaster here, and he still cared about the druids who had died somewhere? The nobles immediately fell silent. Noxus was the kind one to ask, "What about the orcs spellcasters called warlocks?" I received absolutely accurate information from my master. At the moment, the strongest orc warlock, Ghoul, Dan, will not be able to fight for some reason in the short term. The same goes for the Shadow Council. So, as long as you give me a griffin, I'll be safe. Noxus suddenly realized that in the battle with the orcs, the human side was almost suppressed in all aspects. It wasn't just the factor of individual combat power, but also the lack of understanding of the orc warlocks. The Storm royal family's mages were defeated in the battle with the Shadow Council, and the mages were almost dead in name. However, in recent days, there had been no orc warlocks attacking. Fortunately, this was the case. Otherwise, the only remaining Morning Star wizard in the country would have to protect Lang. With just 3 sky wizards, they would not be a match for the Shadow Council. Lothar nodded at Lang. Lang stood up. "All right, I approve of this plan. But I have only one request for you, Earl Marcus. Your Majesty, please speak? Duque stood up and bowed. You must come back alive. Lang said earnestly, Stormwind is on the verge of destruction, and it's not just you, Duke Marcus. For a 15-year-old like you, you've done enough, that's good enough. If the kingdom's fate is to be destroyed, I will calmly accept it. But in the future, when we rebuild Stormwind from the ruins, we still need young people like you to contribute. Hiss. Almost every noble sucked in a cold breath. If it had been anyone else, they would have at least given a military order, saying that if they did not complete the mission, they would die for the country. Now that it was Duque, Lang was actually so lenient that he did not even hesitate to bet on the kingdom's early destruction. How much did Lang value Duque? Such royal favor was unheard of. Even when Medivh was still alive, Lang had never pampered a Medivh so much. But thinking about it, it was normal. At this point, did Duque still need to prove himself? The youngest sky wizard, the richest merchant in the world, the sea king who held the kingdom's lifeline, the hero who killed the demon king Sargeras, saved the queen and the prince, and was the king's great benefactor. If not for the fear of not being rewarded in the future and being blocked by the nobles, Duque would have been a duke by now. Even so, everyone in the noble circle knew that Lang had already greeted the only Morning Star wizard. As long as the situation stabilized, Duque would inherit Medivh's position in the kingdom and become the chief court wizard of Stormwind. Duque's rise was unstoppable. Before Duque returned from Karazhan, no one was confident. Now, many nobles had secretly decided that if Duque's plan to stop the orcs for 10 days was successful, they would completely tie Duque to their family's war chariot. Compared to other nobles, King Lang had a fatal shortcoming. The royal bloodline was too thin. It was not only because he was not a direct descendant of Thoradin the Great, but also because Lang did not have any siblings. Similarly, the only heir was Prince Varian. The queen did not have a child with Lang. But other nobles were different. Wasn't it just a noble daughter? As long as they had a marriage alliance with Duque, even if they lost their territory, their family would still be able to live comfortably. If they could win back their territory in the future, that would be even better. Unknowingly, the nobles had begun to have ideas about Duque. Duque did not know what the nobles were thinking. After thanking Lang for his concern, he prepared to set off. But after stepping out of Stormwind Fortress, he was surprised to find a group of old friends waiting for him. Mentor Norton, I'm so happy to see you. Your aura is not bad. Yes, it was Old Man Norton. Darnielle and Aitana were also beside him. Duque noticed that these two former magic apprentices were now wearing the formal robes of the Royal Wizard Guild. You've advanced. This time, Duque was really surprised. Darnielle smiled foolishly. Aitana once said, if you don't rise in war, you will perish in the flames of war. I just advanced to a level 1 Earth Mage last week. Aitana advanced 2 months before me, and is now a level 3 Earth Mage. The freckled Aitana gave Duque a standard ladle-like bow, her face still a little stiff. Mentor Norton said that we should be able to help you. Old Man Norton came over and took Duque's hand affectionately. Don't refuse, Duque. This old man's old bones are about to fall apart. I'll thank the heavens if they can survive this battle. They have no future with me. Today, I'll throw away my old face. If you don't accept them, I'll kneel here for everyone to see. Duque knew that the old man was serious. Darnielle and Aitana, who were born as commoners, had long been labeled as Duques. If Duque didn't want them, these two really had nowhere to go. Duque turned to face the two. Okay, enough with the pleasantries. You two will follow me from now on. I want to ask you, do you want to become my followers? Or are you my henchmen? Darnielle scratched his head. Is there a difference? Aitana kicked Darnielle lightly. Of course I want to be a follower. Chapter 160. As for followers, it had nothing to do with nationality, religion, or even race. They were loyal only to Duque, who was a wizard. Retainers were different. After all, retainers were the direct subordinates of nobles. Even if the nobles in this era had a tongue twister saying that the subordinates of the nobles were not their own subordinates, it meant that the king could not control the retainers of the nobles. But with the king's righteousness, if the retainers betrayed the nobles, they could still claim to be loyal to the king. In terms of relationship, followers were closer, and it was more in line with the interests of the two young wizards. Even though he knew that the two had limited talent, Duque still accepted them as his followers. This master-follower relationship was also a perfect ending to the fateful encounter they had when they first came out of the Northshire monastery together. "All right, I'll give you a mission now." After settling the matters in Stormwind City, Duque did not move out that night. He had a good sleep. When Lothar asked him why he was so sure that the orcs would not come tonight, Duque replied, "Because the great chief of the horde is Blackhand." Lothar was perplexed by this. Duke wagged his index finger with a confident look on his face. This was the benefit of being a transmigrator. Only a transmigrator would know how different Blackhand's and the next great chief Orgrim Doomhammer's tactics were. Blackhand was indeed a very outstanding orc leader. His excellence was reflected in his ferocity and bravery. Blackhand, who drank the demon's blood, had the common weakness of most green-skinned orcs, violent and irrational. Other than fighting head-on, there was no other way. Orgrim, on the other hand, did not drink the demon's blood, which made his mind clear. This gave Orgrim a natural advantage when it came to military strategy. He was more intelligent and rational. It was the same for Orgrim in history. As one of the most intelligent orcs, Orgrim had once defeated the entire alliance. If it wasn't for the fact that the orcs had betrayed their teammates, perhaps the horde wouldn't have been defeated during the first incident at the Dark Portal. Duque was so sure that the horde would not be able to move out tonight because of his understanding of Blackhand. At this moment, in the tribe's camp, Black's hand, which had turned slightly carbonized due to the power of chaos and was extremely tough, punched Orgrim in the face. Even though Orgrim had already tightened his muscles in preparation for a heavy blow, Orgrim's resolute face was still severely deformed for a short period of time. Orgrim's gigantic body was sent flying out of the tent by Blackhand's punch. "You coward! The tribe doesn't need a coward like you," Blackhand roared. "They have a very powerful spellcaster. Where was Dan when we needed spellcasters' support the most? Where are the warlocks of the Shadow Council?" Orgrim roared back. Even though the beastmen were brave and irrational, they still had rules. The mysterious was mysterious, and the warrior was a warrior. Since ancient times, the shamans of the tribe had been the ones to deal with the enemy's spellcasters. After the shaman profession withered, it was replaced by the warlock profession. The great tribal chief was speechless for a moment before saying, Dan has more important things to do, such as repairing the Door of Darkness." This was a sophistry, but it was also a good reason. If the Door of Darkness was repaired, then the tribe would have an endless supply of reinforcements. Even though the warriors left in that destroyed world were not the most elite, there were still many of them. Orgrim shook his head and stood up stubbornly. "Blackhand, tomorrow, give me another 20,000 elites from the Blackrock tribe. If I can't defeat them, you will see my head." "All right." Blackhand was prepared to act recklessly. Mirror Lake was located south of Stormwind City. If one went to Stormwind City from Goldflash Town, southeast of Stormwind City, it was easy to see this huge lake on the left side of the main road. Now, Mirror Lake had become one of the lifelines of the Beastmen army. It was currently summer, and the heat was scorching the earth, making both sides feel uncomfortable. When there was no battle, the Beastmen were happy to enjoy the cool air under the shade of trees. In order to prevent the damned fishmen and Nagas who obeyed the humans' orders from running into Mirror Lake, the Beastmen had to use thousands of laborers to build a temporary dam. This was to make it the most ideal water source for the Beastmen army. Mirror Lake was located at the foot of a small mountain. In order to prevent the humans from poisoning the lake, they only needed to set up enough patrols near the mouth of the spring. From the top of the mountain, they could clearly see all the movements on the outer wall of the human city of Stormwind City. However, early in the morning, an atmospheric circulation that almost surrounded the entire mountain appeared on this average-sized mountain. The constantly rotating circulation formed a storm, forming a wall of air that was nearly 100 meters tall at the peak of the mountain. The patrolling beastmen tried to pass through this invisible wall of air to see what was happening. However, All the beastmen who tried to do so were instantly torn apart by the violent wind. In the next moment, in response to the first rays of dawn, balls of flames, along with the radiance of the sun, began to spread grandly from the top of the mountain to the vast land. At first, every beastman thought it was an illusion. But soon, when the blazing flames landed on the rough and messy roofs of the tribe's barracks, the fire easily spread. Fire! Fire! The sleepy beastmen had just woken up from their dreams when they realized that the entire camp was in a sea of fire. The beastmen were not unprepared for the humans' fire attack. Many beastman officers instructed the stupid beastmen to use sand to extinguish the fire. They also ordered the beastmen to rush to Mirror Lake to fetch water to extinguish the fire. However, the flames in the sky became denser and denser. The ever-increasing fire made the beastmen's efforts to extinguish the fire useless. Most of them held their weapons blankly and ran to the open space, not knowing what to do. Look up the mountain. Finally, some beastmen realized that something was wrong. A majestic figure stood at the highest point of the mountain. Behind him, his cloak fluttered in the wind like a fluttering flag, attracting the attention of all the beastmen. The figure bathed in the morning light was incomparably dazzling. It was as if he was the radiant sun, as if he was the sun of light who dispelled all the darkness on the earth. Under the illumination of the morning light, the silver spell formation hanging in the air beside him had every fine line and every mysterious rune dyed with a layer of brilliant gold. Countless fireballs shot out from the spell formation, drawing red arcs in the sky that symbolized death and destruction, and fell to the ground in a shocking manner. The endless flames turned the entire land into a sea of fire in the short span of a dozen breaths. Orgrim rushed out of the tent and looked at the mysterious and terrifying figure. He squeezed out a few words through gritted teeth. Duke Marcus. Chapter 161. Of course you have to remember me, because I will become your nightmare. The words spoken by Duke in the Orc language were still echoing in Orgrim Doomhammer's ears. It was like mockery, but it was also like a nightmare that he could never escape from. Great Chief Blackhand brought his guards to Orgrim's side and roared, "You know that human mage?" Of course, it was this Duke Marcus who repelled the surprise attack of my men and me. I had already killed my way to the human chief's throne at that time. Blackhand's face twitched. Of course, he knew that the best way to deal with spellcasters was to find stronger ones. But he had no choice. The orders from the Shadow Council had not been cut off, and he could not even find a single warlock. Grabbing Orgrim's shoulder with one hand, Blackhand pulled Orgrim's body over and roared. Spittle flew all over Orgrim's face as he gave a death order. Now is the time for you to wash away your shame. My adjutant. In order to prevent you from escaping, Deadeye will keep an eye on you. Go. Orgrim's facial muscles twitched as if he was electrocuted. The word shame deeply stimulated Orgrim's nerves. He did not argue. In the eyes of the orcs, failure was failure. There was no way to refute it. The great chief was merciful enough that he did not execute him immediately because of this. Even though he still had the anger of his good friend Durotan's death buried deep in his heart, he knew that this was not the time to challenge Blackhand. Follow me. Orgrim waved his hand, and his elite beastmen charged towards the small hill not far from the Mirror Lake like a murderous flood. Beside the elites of the Blackrock clan led by Orgrim, there was also a fierce army marching side by side with Orgrim's army. It was Kilrog Deadeye's Bloodring clan elites. The Bloodring was once the most powerful clan in the Horde. They still had a shocking number of people and powerful combat power. Unfortunately, they ran into Duque, who didn't have a warlock to suppress him. If they were the evil darkness that drowned the earth, then Duque was the light of dawn that washed away the shadows. In the morning light, Duque's entire body was shining with golden light. Behind him was a Stormwind lion flag. Duque stood at the top of the hill and looked down at the thousands of orcs who were crawling over like ants. Ha! Darniel, help me carry the flag. I want to let these guys know that Stormwind is not to be trifled with. Ha! Duque's maniacal laughter reached the ears of Darniel, who was responsible for carrying the flag. Unknowingly, Darniel had also become ambitious. He had often heard about how awesome Duque was, But he had never seen it for himself. He had never felt it so vividly. How many orcs were down there? There should be at least tens of thousands of them. This was a power that could destroy an entire kingdom. But could Duque face it so proudly? Looking at Duque bathed in the morning light, his entire body radiating brilliance, Darnielle was momentarily entranced. It was a kind of fanatical hero worship. Duque? A great general overseeing the battlefield? Using his own strength to shake the terrifying orc army that numbered in the tens of thousands, this had long surpassed the scope of a general. If the simple-minded Darnielle had to think of an adjective, it would be God, the guardian of the entire kingdom. At the foot of the hill, the orc warriors were fortunate enough to meet a human mage who was going all out without their own warlocks suppressing them for the first time in the elven forest. Once the huge fireballs were hit, they would immediately release all the energy contained within them. The terrifying impact easily tore apart the grass and blew up the tree roots. The sputtering flames spread directly to the orc warriors. Fear of fire was the instinct of most creatures. That kind of burning sensation that exceeded the limits of the body wasn't something that every warrior could easily overcome with courage and surmount. 36 huge fire magic formations continuously tilted the water tank-sized fireballs. This was a firestorm that was even more intense than a meteor shower. Many orc warriors were blown into the sky by the fireballs. They fell and howled before being swallowed by the flames. In no time, they became corpses that emitted a disgusting burnt smell. The flames from the explosions continued to shine. Darnielle, who was behind Duque, could not help but narrow his eyes. Not far from his field of vision, even though many orcs were burned alive, more orcs had already entered the final charge. Their line of defense was spread out in an arc, neither too closely packed nor too sparsely spread out as they surrounded Duque. Of course, the 40-degree incline of the mountain path had slightly slowed down their speed. But for orcs who could climb mountains as easily as eating and drinking, this was not too much of a problem. Their advance did not slow down at all. "Cover your ears," Duque suddenly said. Darnielle did as he was told. In the next instant, a long river of flames suddenly appeared at the foot of the hill, immediately cutting off the orcs from entering the field. Then, there was a series of explosions. Those were the cannonballs that Duque had scattered on the hill in the morning. Because of this, Stormwind's few griffins were exhausted. Because the horde had found a new direction to attack the city, the cannons placed at the main gate of Stormwind City had all lost their purpose. With limited transportation, these cannonballs could not be pulled away, so it was better for Duque to play with them. Just as they stepped halfway up the hill, the cannonballs that had been detonated by the fire kept exploding under the orc warriors' feet, creating pillars of fire mixed with mud. Brave and determined faces continuously fell in the flashes of the explosions, and the enraged orcs continued to advance toward the top of the hill over the corpses of their companions. They were still nearly 300 feet away from Duque. At this distance, the orcs could not do anything to Duque. But Duque could rely on his control of the elements in the surrounding sky to open up all the arcane fire magic circuits without hesitation, pouring magic onto the hill. The deafening sound of the explosions shocked the entire orc army, and even the human warriors on the outer walls of Stormwind City more than 1,000 feet away. Even if it was the lowest level of fireball, the impact it caused was quite shocking. The exploding fireball almost overturned the ground. On the originally lush hill beside the Mirror Lake, every branch was broken by the blazing heat wave. The broken branches kept falling and then flying again. Among the Blackrock and Blood Ring tribes that rushed up the hill, the flags that symbolized glory and power fell one after another. At the foot of the hill, the great chief Blackhand's eyes widened. "This is impossible." In contrast, after seeing the raging fire and hearing the orc screams, the soldiers of Stormwind City burst into thunderous cheers. On top of the city wall, every warrior showed an expression of ecstasy. They knew that their new guardian, Duke Marcus, was teaching the orcs how to be human. Chapter 162. A normal wizard's fireball spell would not be as exaggerated as Duque's. It flew for 200 to 300 meters and did not dissipate. This kind of control was something only the highest-ranked wizards could have, but it appeared in Duque, a mere sky wizard. With the help of the system Elf, Duque's control of elemental energy had reached a shocking level. He hit wherever he pointed, with the accuracy of a godly archer. He controlled tens of magic formations at the same time, and was far above Morningstar wizards in multicasting. Even though the orcs were no longer charging blindly like targets, and even though they had started to learn to move irregularly to avoid the fireballs. But the continuous torrent of fireballs still did not miss their target. Often, a fireball that did not hit the orc in front would hit the one behind due to the line of sight of the orc in front or some other reason. Sometimes, it looked as if Duque had shot a fireball, and the orcs had foolishly offered their heads to the fireball at the cost of their lives. The orcs' line of attack had already spread to more than 200 meters wide, but still, not a single orc could get within 150 meters of Duque. At a distance that looked like a small not even a ballista would have a chance of hitting him, let alone long-range weapons like throwing axes. The water vapor around Duque evaporated due to the high temperature, causing Duque's figure to look strangely distorted from afar. Only the heavens knew if Duque had set up a wind shield or a similar defensive spell. But Darnielle was sure that Duque had at least the most basic protective arrow spell. Whether he had stacked 10 or tens of them, Darnielle could not tell. The concentration of elemental energy around Duque's body was so high that it was almost tangible. It could be said that Duque alone covered half of the battlefield. He had practically suppressed the orcs' attacks in all directions. This had completely surpassed skill, and was already in existence at the level of magical art. A magician is a source of firepower. Duque was a perfect example of this. Darnielle, who was behind Duque, was dumbfounded. A kind of involuntary worship and awe filled Darnielle's chest. Even though he knew that he would never reach the level of a sky mage, Darnielle could not suppress his yearning. So my master will definitely reach, no, even surpass the level of the previous guardian god, Medivh? Is he a super mage? Darnielle suddenly felt that it was worth it to die for Duque after witnessing this scene. It was supposed to be a one-sided massacre, but the whole situation was broken after a huge red figure appeared. In history, the next great chieftain of the horde, Orgrim Doomhammer. The muscles around Duque's eyes twitched. He already knew that Orgrim had an exaggerated resistance to the elements, especially the fire element. It was obvious that Orgrim was going all out. Perhaps it was to defend against Duque's fireballs. Orgrim rushed over the mountain stream that flowed to the Mirror Lake. Orgrim's condition was clearly abnormal. Even the phrase, large strides, was not enough to describe his berserk state. With a hammer of destruction that weighed at least 200 to 300 pounds, Orgrim ran as if he was flying. Every step he took covered more than 5 meters. In the eyes of humans, this was the distance of a triple jump. But for Orgrim, who was more than 2.5 meters tall, this was only the level of sprinting. What was even more frightening was the abnormality under his feet. Duque saw the steam billowing everywhere. Damn, are you an electric perm? Duque had long since given up on using fire spells to deal with Orgrim. With a wave of his hand, 36 magicians' hands appeared in the air 20 meters around Orgrim. There were 6 of them in a group, and they activated Arcane Impact. 2 seconds later, Duque was dumbfounded again. Ineffective. Ineffective. Completely ineffective. The surging arcane energy that was highly compressed crashed into Orgrim's body. Oh, it was less than 20 centimeters away from his body, and it was automatically dispelled by an even more powerful and mysterious force. This was a move that could send Orgrim flying again and again in the last battle, but now it was completely ineffective. Damn, are you sure you're not called Orgrim Saint Seiya? You can't use the same move twice? Orgrim, whose every step changed the color of the mountains and rivers, was already within 100 meters of Duque in a few breaths. Duque frowned and clasped his hands together. Instantly, the elements in the air changed again. Ha! With a light shout, the entire mountain spring froze under Duque's feet. The cruel cold air flowed along the flowing stream and froze the entire stream in an instant. Countless icicles abruptly extended along the river like a hedgehog. The high-speed icicles were sharp enough to pierce through any mortal's body. Arctic Wave. This was a self-created spell that Duque had modified from Darson's cold prison. Although it was not complete, Duque was confident that it could stop Orgrim. Duque succeeded. Although Orgrim's body was emitting heat, it was obvious that he was not used to the icicles that had physical properties. The high temperature continuously melted the icicles, but each icicle would pierce his body first, creating thumb-sized bloody holes. Faced with more and more icicles, Orgrim was surrounded. At this moment, another Beastman hero arrived, Kilrog Deadeye. As the chieftain of one of the 7 largest Beastman tribes, Kilrog's strength was definitely top-notch. If not for his old age, Duque was willing to bet that this old Beastman's combat power was at least at the level of Black Hand. In front of Duque, Kilrog displayed agility that was comparable to that of a night elf. Yes, agility. If Orgrim was said to be more like an angry lion, then Kilrog was now an agile cheetah. He actually stepped on the blunt side of the icicles that Duque's icicles had pierced out, as if he was flying towards Duque. Multicast, activate. This was not a spell that Duque had asked the system elf to cast, but Duque's own true multitasking. Its power was more than a level higher than the system elf spell. Blizzard and Wide Area Icicle. For the first time, Duque showed the world his shocking magic circuit. No matter how agile Kilrog was, he could not be immune to this kind of omnidirectional magic attack. For a moment, his figure also froze. Kilrog was so anxious that he croaked. The beastmen behind him still wanted to rush forward, but they were suppressed by the system elf's hand of magic and the magic formation. Chapter 163. Darnielle, who was standing behind Duque, was completely dumbfounded. Every spell Duque used required the full strength of a top-level sky mage, but Duque was using 3 spells at the same time, and all of them were instantaneous spells that ignored incantations. And judging from the status of the 2 orcs, they should be of high status. Boss, who are they? In private, Duque insisted that Darnielle and Itana call him boss. Oh, the chief of a top-level clan and the next chief of a tribe, replied Duque casually. Darnielle's face immediately turned green. Thanks to Garona's dissemination of tribal knowledge to the middle and upper echelons of Stormwind, most of the middle and high-ranking officers, as well as mages like Darnielle of the royal family, knew the general strength of the other side. It was generally accepted that the commanders of human armies could not defeat the chiefs of top-level clans, but could generally fight to a draw with the chiefs of second-rate clans. This was based on the many cases where the human armies were stripped of their numbers. It was simple, they were killed and their flags taken. In the many large-scale battles between Stormwind and the Horde, there were tragic cases where the commanders were killed and their flags taken. Only the publicly acknowledged god of war, Lothar, once killed the chief of a second-rate clan and saved some face. But this did not stop Lang from ordering the retreat of the army. A flag taken by the enemy was a disgrace, and a disgraced flag could not lead the soldiers to victory. This was an ironclad rule left behind by Thoradin the Great. So, when he saw Duque single-handedly suppress the 2 famous heroes of the tribe, Darnielle's mouth opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed inside. But good times did not last long, and Duque immediately exclaimed, "Holy shit!" Darnielle did not know what this meant, but he knew that it was definitely not a good thing. Duque had indeed almost died, if not for the system elf constantly scanning the surroundings for him. Why did mages need a large number of followers? The powerful firepower of the mages formed a stark contrast with their weak vitality. If he didn't have a magic shield or an ice shield, even if the weakest militia stabbed him with their pitchforks, Pharaoh would still die. This forced mages to keep their distance when fighting against warriors. It was already very difficult for Duque to deal with 2 chieftain-level heroes. Those 2 superhuman fellows were simply unreasonable. But an even more unreasonable fellow was yet to come. The system elf had given him the highest level of warning. A huge red exclamation mark appeared on Duque's retina, pointing straight to the left side of the mountain. It was a series of footprints that were very, very far away. If it wasn't for the system elf's special marking, Duque wouldn't have realized that this was a series of footprints made by a single person, because each footprint was at least 10 meters apart. There was no one in his field of vision, but the system elf used a simple and direct method to outline a sturdy human figure with a red frame. And this figure was approaching Duque at high speed. "Ha!" Duque shouted, and with a wave of his left hand, an ice tornado filled with freezing air suddenly swept towards the seemingly empty space. A burly human figure was forced to appear in the air. An orc sword saint. This was an orc with a crimson flag on his back, a large brown-black strange bead around his neck, a white beard fluttering in the wind, and a long single-edged sword in his hand. Duque recognized who he was at a glance. Samuro. He was an orc born in the Orc Fireblade clan with unparalleled martial arts. In history, he had experienced the First and Second War at the Dark Portal. Samuro was an expert in stealth, and his stealth skills were displayed to the extreme in the Battle of the Elven Forest not long ago. 34 commanders of the Stormwind Kingdom had lost their lives in his hands, including 2 generals and 1 deputy commander. The Fireblade clan was a famous sword saint clan among the orcs, and this clan had given birth to countless sword saints. Unparalleled combat talent, agility, and destructive power were incomparable to ordinary warriors. Almost all orc warriors had an inexplicable admiration for the sword saints. The moment Samuro's figure appeared, the orc army that was still unyielding and trying to get close to Duque let out a thunderous cheer. This cheer seemed to make Kilrog Deadeye lose his composure. With a fierce roar, his body grew by a full 30 centimeters. If Orgrim was said to have transformed into a berserker, then Kilrog was said to have increased his speed and magic resistance. The effect of the freezing air from the blizzard had on him was reduced by 70% in an instant. Samuro's figure disappeared into the air again. Without a doubt, he must have activated the invisibility effect of Gale Step and pounced towards Duque. In an instant, the famous heroes of the 3 tribes charged over together. "Boss?" Darnielle called out in a questioning tone. In the plan that had been set before, Duque was to run after setting the fire. But when to run was still Duque's call. Duque knew very well that in a one-on-one situation he would be at an absolute disadvantage against any one of the 3 horde heroes. Duque couldn't understand the physique of the orc hero that could increase his magic resistance no matter how hard he scratched his head. Was this the 20% mutation in the world that didn't match Duque's impression? Or was it the level suppression brought by the orc hero? This was a very serious question. It was related to whether Duque would take a detour when he saw the horde heroes in the future, or find a way to kill them directly. Heroes couldn't be replicated. Heroes with leadership abilities were even fewer if they were killed. At this point in time, before the appearance of the first-generation paladin, the humans really only had one Anduin Lothar to support the horde, which was full of fierce warriors. In fact, before Bolvar Fordragon became a paladin, Bolvar's strength was only second-rate. If possible, Duque still wanted to see if he could kill 1 or 2 horde heroes. At the very least, he wanted to find out if their abilities were different from what he remembered. Duke stretched out both of his hands, as though he was pushing open an abnormally heavy door. When he completely opened his hands, his entire body spread out, and an incomparably huge cover, with a blizzard constantly revolving around it, appeared impressively on the entire mountain top. When a mage's ice barrier was expanded 100 times with the support of unimaginable magic power, what would it look like? The answer was the ice barrier in front of him. An enemy that entered the barrier would be affected by a certain speed reduction effect and a certain chance of being frozen into ice. Chapter 164. The situation in front of them made the 3 tribal heroes frown. Enter? Or not enter? This was a serious problem. Enter? The blizzards and tornadoes inside were not to be trifled with. Looking at those sharp icicles spinning non-stop, anyone would have goosebumps. Not enter? Tens of thousands of tribal elites were watching. Great Chief Blackhand had even given a death order. No matter how many people died, they had to tear this human mage into pieces. Retreat. Samuro, Kilrog, and Orgrim, who had reappeared, looked at each other. Unexpectedly, It was the Orc Sword Saint who made the first move. Abandoning the invisibility effect of Gale Step, the Orc Sword Saint jumped directly into Duque's huge ice shield that was more than 100 meters in diameter. He waved his long sword and began to spin violently. Samuro's wild eyes were filled with endless killing intent. Duque must die. Any human who dared to challenge the glory of the tribe must die. They must use the most tragic blood sacrifice to pay tribute to their compatriots who were burned to death by magic flames. The sword flashes were dazzling. The unparalleled spinning sword flashes were like a whirlwind, turning into a storm in a very short time. It was a tornado made of sword energy. The damage of the terrifying sword flashes even exceeded the reach of swords and knives, forming a sword energy that continuously cut at Duque's shield. Darnielle held the flag behind Duque in shock and muttered to himself, "What skill is this?" Blade Storm, the signature skill of the Fireblade clan's Sword Saint. Duque sneered. Duque could almost close his eyes and write down the Sword Saint's combat skills. "If this is all you have, then go to hell." Thus, Duque had his eyes on Samuro. Unlike Kilrog and Orgrim, who had powerful physiques, Samuro was indeed powerful. The biggest difference was that Samuro was an assassin, while those two cockroach-like fellows were warriors. From a certain point of view, the Sword Saint was similar to a mage. They both had the strongest attack and destructive power, but their bodies were extremely weak. No, the Sword Saint was even more extreme. After increasing his speed and attack power, the Sword Saint only had mirror image as a life-saving skill. He relied on the many doppelgangers to confuse the enemy. Duque was least afraid of mirror images. With the system elf scan, Duque would always be able to tell which was the real body and which was the original in the shortest amount of time. Of course, Duque had a simpler and more violent method. In the next second, he abruptly raised his left hand high up. After his left hand snapped his fingers in an extremely pretentious manner, his left hand suddenly swung down to the left. This was a new move that was created by combining De Song's Freezing Hell and Ice Ring, Rapid Avalanche. With a wave of his arm, the entire area within the ice barrier, apart from Duque, Darnielle, and the area 10 meters in diameter behind them, was instantly frozen. In the beginning, Sacred Swordmaster Samuro wanted to rely on his high-speed rotation to withstand the cold air. However, he immediately discovered that his rotation was becoming slower and slower, and his movements were becoming more and more sluggish. He was like a spinning top that was about to lose all its kinetic energy. Not good. For a moment, Duque almost thought that he could kill Samuro in a second. When Duque opened his right hand and made a clenching gesture, he was about to use a giant ice hand that appeared out of nowhere to grab Samuro and crush him to death. That was when Orgrim made his move. The giant square-headed hammer, Hammer of Destruction, came crashing down, and a crack in the lava that could be seen with the naked eye blasted through Duque's ice barrier. Coincidentally, it allowed the violent heat to enter Samuro's blade storm that was about to stop in the next second. After the high temperature was transmitted, Samuro suddenly had enough energy to resist Duque's cold air. The blade storm that had almost stopped once again displayed its shocking destructive power. The high-speed rotating blades brought with them an extremely high temperature that was enough to evaporate all the water in the surrounding air. They actually ate away at least a quarter of Duque's barrier in an instant. Duque's face darkened. I knew that Hammer of Destruction wasn't some blue-quality item that was sold at a roadside stall. Duque cursed. As Orgrim's famous weapon, Hammer of Destruction was never a nameless weapon. After being immersed in lava all year round, Hammer of Destruction had an extremely exaggerated fire elemental energy. However, Hammer of Destruction wasn't at its peak yet. Just like Lothar's King's Sword, when a certain weapon condensed the will and faith of millions of people in an entire race. Even if that weapon itself was made of ordinary iron, it would be upgraded to at least the level of a demigod weapon. Not to mention that Hammer of Destruction itself wasn't an ordinary weapon. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that after becoming the chief of the tribe, Orgrim's strength would at least double. In the next moment, Kilrog charged over. With two short axes that were less than half a meter long in his hands, Kilrog Deadeye immediately turned into a berserker. His axes carried some kind of strange power. Every time he swung them at high speed, they could actually reduce the frost aura in Duque's barrier at a high speed. Duque's already darkened face became even darker, not much better than the bottom of a pot. F*CK. All of the Horde's heroes are F*King perverts. I'm not going to play with you anymore. Donald, let's go. A real B*TCH should be won with the B*TCH, using the B*TCH to hurt people from thousands of miles away. When the three Horde heroes revealed their trump cards, Duque immediately realized that this was only part of their trump cards. It was still too early for him to kill them. That was why Duque ran away without saying a word. He grabbed Darnielle and retreated. Because they were looking up from the mountainside, the three Horde heroes were shocked to find that Duque had actually hidden a griffin not far behind him. He had no intention of fighting to the death with the Horde heroes. Duque turned around and rode on the griffin behind him. The griffin did not understand why Duque suddenly wanted to leave when he was in the middle of a good fight. However, it was well trained. After sensing the movement of its temporary master, the griffin let out a long cry of dissatisfaction and flew up. Duke Marcus, if you're still a man, come down and fight me one-on-one. Seeing that Duque wanted to run, Orgrim was almost driven mad. He could not imagine why this seemingly powerful human mage would have the idea of running away. Didn't he already suppress all three of them? Orgrim, if you're still a man, come to Storm Fort and fight me one-on-one in front of 100,000 human soldiers. A bunch of Horde heroes coming at me together, and you still have the nerve to say one-on-one? The griffin climbed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, Duque had risen to a height of 30 meters. Being countered by Duque's orc language, Orgrim was speechless. Duque was right. All three of them were famous heroes in the Horde. Just as Duque was about to escape, a mournful whistling sound came from afar and approached at high speed. Chapter 165. Bullet time was a ridiculous thing, but with the help of the system elf, Duque managed to do it. The time around him suddenly slowed down 100 times, and the thing that had almost reached the speed of sound was finally reflected in Duque's retina under the almost stagnant time. It was a strange, huge single-edged axe. The edge of the axe looked like a huge hook, or an elephant's trunk. There were not many axes like this in the world of Azeroth, but they were definitely not few either. Considering that the person who threw the axe was at least 100 meters away from Duque, it was impossible for someone to throw an axe like this from 100 meters away. And from 100 meters away, he was able to throw an axe in such an inhumane manner. When he threw it, it let out a terrifying shriek that could shatter one's soul, as well as a terrifying power that could split the heavens and split the earth. There was only one name for this axe: Bloodhowl. An ordinary axe was obviously not worth Duque's surprise. This, Bloodhowl, was the most important part of its owner's reputation. Grom Hellhowl. Even though Duque was a human and was destined to join the Alliance in the future, he could not help but respect this hero of the Horde. Looking in the direction where the axe was thrown, with the help of the system, a burly figure was marked out by a red border. As a veteran player, Duque recognized Grom at a glance. He had braided hair, which was rare among orcs. His black hair was parted in the middle, and he had a ferocious trapezoidal face. He also had a shoulder guard on his right shoulder and a belt with a skull pattern across his chest. His brown body was covered with muscles that contained an unimaginable explosive power. He even maintained the gesture of throwing the axe. Grom Hellhowl was famous because he was the first orc to be bewitched by Ghoul, Dan, and drink the blood of the Abyssal Lord Manaroth. This caused the dark brown orc skin to turn green, and they gained the power to invade the world of Azeroth. As the chief of the Warsong tribe, one of the most powerful orc clans, Grom's strength was definitely top-notch. In the second battle of the Dark Portal in history, the axe of Grom, who was responsible for guarding the Dark Portal, was stained with the blood of human warriors. He had killed as many as 48 famous and powerful knights. His greatest achievement in history was when he sacrificed himself and cooperated with Thrall to kill the Lord of the Abyss, Manaroth, who had harmed the orcs. Duque had never imagined that Grom Hellscream, who hadn't participated in the first battle at the Dark Portal, would actually come to ambush him. History had once again reached a turning point. At this moment, Duque felt as if his spiritual sea had frozen. Seeing something didn't mean you could do it. Duque's scalp went numb. From bullet time, which had slowed down the flow of time, he saw the starting point of the axe and the ending point of the axe, his back. However, there was no way for Duque to dodge this sure kill attack. Speed up, deceleration, left and right dodging, block. In that instant, the system genie helped Duque simulate what would happen next thousands of times in his mind, but Duque couldn't escape even once. This had nothing to do with technique. This was an attack that had completely surpassed the boundaries of martial arts, physics, and science. It felt as if this was the kind of attack that was guaranteed to hit, and the process of making up for the hit itself was a completely unreasonable attack that went against the laws of karma. Lothar was the king's sword that had gathered the will and faith of humans for more than 1,000 years. Grom's axe toss had also gathered all the spirit, energy, and spirit of this sword saint, who was also from the Fireblade clan, as well as the wild and unparalleled will of the 100,000 warriors of the clan. The orcs will never be slaves. Grom Hellscream's classic roar seemed to echo in Duque's ears. In this spinning axe, Duque saw an illusion. He saw the struggle of the orcs on the land of Draenor for thousands of years. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. The orcs became the masters of the land of Draenor with their wild and unyielding will. Now that Draenor was heading towards destruction, the orcs saw Azeroth as the next stop for the orcs to reproduce and continue because of the collusion between Ghoul, Dan, and Sargeras. There was no compromise, no fluke. At this moment, Duque finally realized that even though he was a mage, sometimes he had to fight for real. Ah! Duque yelled. At this time, Darnielle, who was helping to steer the griffin, was scared out of his wits when he realized that 20 meters behind him, there was an incomparably huge axe cleaving through the air. Suddenly, 12 magic formations and 36 hands of magic appeared not far in front of the griffin's left. Darnielle's mouth was wide open in shock, and he didn't even realize that the strong wind brought by the high-speed flight was pouring into his mouth, causing his face to swell and become very funny. Multicasting and mobile casting were two special metamagic abilities that many mages couldn't train for a lifetime. Not everyone could calm down while moving at high speed, let every incantation enter the spirit sea, and use magic power to activate them in the correct order. Not to mention multicasting of mobile casting. Even if Duque cast his magic silently, it was still an inconceivable thing for mortals. It was like a person running at the speed of a 100-meter race and reciting 48 different ancient poems of more than 100 words in his mind at the same time without slowing down. Was this done by a human? But Duque did it with the help of the system elf. Not only Darnielle, but Orgrim, Kilrog, and Samuro, who were watching Gromhell roar nervously from below, as well as the great chief Blackhand not far away, and thousands of orcs all witnessed this spectacle. The gorgeous formation that suddenly appeared in the sky was like a miracle depicted in epics. Arcane impact fell with a loud bang. It wasn't the messy kind of torrential rain, but a kind of strange rhythm, a very regular and accurate shot. Bang, 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 bang. In a very short time, dozens of arcane impact spells fell on the spinning axe blade, each strike less than 1/50th of a second apart. But each strike hit the same position on the left of the spinning axe blade that was constantly changing position in the air. From left to right, the arcane impact on the 12 magic formations blasted out, and the 36 hands of magic also blasted out arcane bullets. Unknowingly, the great bloodroar had been led astray. Chapter 166. Grom Hellscream roared as he widened his bell-sized eyes. His bloodshot eyes were filled with disbelief. Unlike the other boorish beastmen, Grom came from the Fireblade clan, which emphasized technique, willpower, and will the most. This clan produced many sword saints, and their battle philosophy was different from most of the beastmen. Grom clearly knew that the strike he had absolute confidence in had been led astray. The slightest error could lead to a huge difference. The slight deviation was accumulating, and the miraculous combo was transmitted back to him from the blood roar that was connected to his mind. Even if there was a 10-foot thick wall in front of him, Grom was confident that he could break through it and land the axe on the enemy's back. He had miscalculated. This mysterious human wizard that he had never met before had shocking techniques that left him in awe. Even though he was watching from afar, he could understand what Duque had done. The axe, which was powerful enough to split a mountain and split the earth, felt like it was chopping paper. Every layer of paper slightly weakened the power of the axe. Bit by bit, like water dripping through a stone. However, Duque's method was even more extreme and many times more precise. The 3-digit mid-tier spell combo had caused the fatal blow to deviate. Sigh! Grom Hellscream roared as he let out a long sigh. The sigh was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Grom, who never lost confidence, suddenly felt an irresistible sense of helplessness. In order to win, he had poured the willpower of his entire clan into Blood Roar. It felt like it had forcefully twisted the cause and effect of fate. However, his opponent had easily brought fate back to its original path. Just like how water flowed downwards, the sun would always rise after a long night, and the year was divided into 4 seasons. This axe, if you say it will hit, it doesn't count. If I say it won't, then it won't. As countless orcs looked up, the famous Blood Roar finally deviated from its original path and brushed past Duque less than half a meter away from him. The griffin Duque was so shocked that it lost a few feathers, and Darnielle was so scared that he almost peed his pants. However, they did not cause any real damage to the detestable Duke Marcus. Ha! Ha! The griffin flew higher and higher. In just a few breaths, it had already soared into the clouds, turning into a small black dot that was almost invisible to the naked eye. It only left the bitter orcs with a string of wild and arrogant laughter. Almost every orc's face was black. Perhaps it was because of the smoke, or perhaps it was simply because his face was black. There was such an earth-shattering explosion 1,000 meters away. There were raging flames, thick smoke, and clearly audible screams. It would be strange if the human guards on the outer walls of Stormwind City could not hear or see it. Looking at the griffin descending from the clouds again, looking at Duque's iconic wizard robe on the griffin, the defenders could not help but let out deafening cheers. Well done, Earl Marcus. Kill those green-skin people. Burn, burn, burn. It's better to burn them all to death. Sir Marcus, you are our patron saint. Duque let Darnielle drive the griffin and fly slowly over the outer walls. Every time he raised his hand, a louder cheer would be aroused. Lothar flew over with a small group of griffin knights. This Azeroth Prince of Dreams had wavy black hair fluttering in the wind. Before he got close, his loud, lion-like laughter could be heard. Ha! Well done, Duque. Hey! I almost lost my life there. A few of the chiefs in the tribe probably hate me to the core. It's fine. Even if you were really trapped there, I'm sure I can bring people to rescue you. Looking at Lothar's large hemp rope with a slip knot on the griffin's butt, Duque rolled his eyes. Damn it, Lothar actually meant what he said. When the time comes, will you rope me like a western cowboy, hang me by the neck and pull me up? If it weren't for you, Lang wouldn't have allowed me to dispatch all the griffin knights. Duque suddenly felt a burst of warmth in his heart. A line of griffins flew to the inner city wall of Stormwind City, near the flight point on the east side. The griffins spread their huge wings and began to slow down. After a few flaps, their sharp claws made a sharp sound on the thick hay. Before the griffin came to a stop, Lothar had already nimbly flipped over. But there was one person faster than Lothar, Storm King Lang. How was the battle? Lang asked impatiently. It's fine, the beastmen will get lost for the time being. Are you sure? Lang's face was filled with undisguised surprise. Of course. Duque's voice rose an octave. Not only did I burn most of their tents, but I also added some seasoning to their only water source. Seasoning? Almost at the same time, the great chief of the tribe, Blackhand, could almost be renamed to Blackface. Report, the water source has been poisoned? Poisoned? How can running water be poisoned? Beside him, Kilrog angrily asked the captain of Blackhand's bodyguards. I don't know. But the water flowing down from the mountains is green. My men have personally confirmed that the beasts will die after drinking it. Someone saw Naga in the water. It should be the human Naga who poisoned it. Wasn't there a water bar blocking it? Orgrim asked. It was blown up by that human mage. It was too chaotic just now, none of us noticed. The few tribe leaders fell silent at the same time. At first, the elven forest was filled with murlocs and Naga, attacking the orc laborers who were fetching water from the river. But Orgrim came up with an idea, which was to build a crude dam to prevent the Naga and murlocs from entering the forest. After a few attempts by the Naga to bypass the dam and enter the water, they were ambushed by the orcs. Almost no Naga could be seen in the elven forest. They didn't expect to be ambushed by Duque, allowing the Naga to enter the forest. Now, all the trees that could provide shade had been burned down by Duque, and the only water source had been polluted. There weren't tens of thousands of people here. If there were only a few of them, they could slowly dig deep wells. The problem was that there were 300,000 soldiers here. The orcs were very brave warriors, but they weren't undead. They needed to eat, drink, and defecate too. Without water, this was definitely a very serious problem. Blackhand was very violent, but he hadn't completely lost his mind. The word was stuck in his throat a few times before it popped out from between his teeth. Retreat. On the other side, a deafening roar came from the direction of the city gate, spreading throughout Stormwind City. Every soldier in the city raised their heads in confusion, looking at the outer city wall in confusion. Not long after, a messenger immediately shouted as he galloped on his horse. Victory! Victory! Sky Mage Earl Duke Marcus ambushed the orc camp, burning over 10,000 orcs to death. Now the orcs are retreating from the south gate. Chapter 167. The crowd involuntarily became even more restless. The black flames of the distant fire soared into the sky, and could be clearly seen even across the high city walls. Originally, no one knew that it was Duque who had set the fire, but when the messenger said so, the crowd immediately went from restless to seething. Long live Stormwind! Long live His Majesty Lang! Long live His Excellency Marcus! The people were simple and honest. Whoever could bring them a safe and happy life would be their god and heaven. Since the start of the War of the Dark Portal, the kingdom had been retreating on all fronts. The Red Ridge Mountain had fallen. Half of the Twilight Forest had fallen. Not long ago, the Elven Forest, the core area that the kingdom was most proud of, had fallen into the hands of the cruel and terrifying beastmen. The most unbearable thing was that the green-skinned devils had invaded the city yesterday. The people were in a state of panic, and they unknowingly lost their trust in the king and even the kingdom. It was at this time that the news of Duque's great victory suddenly came, like a clear spring, washing away the haze in people's hearts. This timely victory was tantamount to a cardiac stimulant, and it very well restored the confidence of the army and civilians. The retreat of the tribe, even if it was temporary, made the sword of Damocles hanging above their heads move a little. This was how people were. Even though they vaguely knew that they were still lingering near the gates of hell, as long as they did not see it with their own eyes, the threat would not be so obvious. Seeking Duque. The hero Duque. The kingdom's new guardian Duque. Duke Marcus' reputation was spreading like wildfire in a variety of ways. In the next few days, Duque rode a griffin and set fire all over the elven forest. A dignified sky wizard became an arsonist. This was an inconceivable thing for a wizard who prided himself on being noble. There were voices of opposition, but in the face of the amazing results, such voices quickly disappeared without a trace. Firstly, Duque had the absolute support of the king. Secondly, the talents of the royal family's wizard corps had withered, and the only Morning Star wizard was only acting as the king's bodyguard. No one had the right to criticize Duque, who had appeared as the hero who had killed Sargeras. Duque's fire was effective. The term, scorching summer, was not an exaggeration. The dry forest was set ablaze almost at the slightest touch. A few fireballs in the upwind direction would turn into a forest fire that was almost impossible to extinguish. If it wasn't for Orgrim's suggestion, the beastmen would have suffered even greater losses. Duque was ruthless enough to set fire to the forest. This was something Orgrim didn't expect. The continuous fire stirred up thick smoke that covered the sky, almost turning the entire forest into a flaming hell. Except for the areas where the trees had been cut down long ago, or the lakes and rivers in the elven forest, all the trees had been burned by Duque. The problem that followed almost drove the leaders of the tribe crazy. "We're out of food." Orgrim was the first to speak during the tribal chieftains' meeting. Warriors of the tribe fought against 3 humans on the battlefield. It was the same for their appetite. The violent beastmen weren't like the weak humans in their eyes, who could survive on bread. To maintain their burly physique, large amounts of meat were essential. The hunters of the tribe had to go deep into the forest every day to kill large numbers of animals. Unlike the old orc Draenor, there weren't many large or even gigantic creatures in the elven forest. Wild boars, gnolls, and even captured murlocs had all become food for the beastmen. Anything larger than a squirrel in the forest had been hunted down. They didn't realize it when their territory was expanding rapidly, but now that their attacks had stopped and the forest was suddenly set on fire, these fellows who were 99% muscle-brained finally realized the severity of the problem. "Aren't we learning how to rear pigs?" Blackhand asked in a muffled voice. "Pigs don't grow up in a day." Orgrim didn't think much of Blackhand's brainlessness before, but now he felt that having a tribal chieftain like this was like riding a giant wolf rushing to hell. All the chieftains looked at Blackhand, waiting for him to make a decision. As the first tribal chieftain of the tribe, Blackhand wasn't a very smart person. Or rather, Ghoul, Dan had purposely chosen Blackhand to make it easier for him to control him. Similarly, in the tribe, it was usually the bravest and most capable of fighting who became the chieftain. And the smartest ones were mostly the shamans in the tribe. But now, the shaman profession was on the decline, and the warlocks that replaced it were mysterious and sneaky. Recently, all the warlocks in the Shadow Council had disappeared. Blackhand really couldn't come up with a plan if he suddenly asked him to. Unwittingly, Blackhand turned to look at his most trusted aide, Orgrim Doomhammer. At that moment, the anger in Orgrim's heart burned 1,000 times stronger. He had had enough. He had had enough of this Shadow Council chief who killed his good friend, Durotan, and his wife. He had had enough of this reckless chief who didn't care about the lives of the tribe's warriors. He had had enough of this brainless and irresponsible Blackhand. Orgrim made up his mind. After the Horde survived this crisis, he would follow the tradition of the other clans and challenge the great chief Blackhand for the position of chief, Makara. He would kill this puppet of the Shadow Council in a duel, and then take care of the Shadow Council. But Duque's ruthless and effective magic attacks left a deep impression on Orgrim. Only a mystic could deal with a mystic. Should he kill Ghoul, Dan, and his warlocks? For the first time, Orgrim hesitated. But he had to solve the crisis in front of him first. Orgrim pointed to the north on the military map he got from the humans. "We don't need so many warriors to take down this small Stormwind city. Chieftain, I suggest we split up. In this place called Iron Furnace Castle, there is another kind of weak and short humanoid creatures called dwarves. Since the tribe wants to be the master of this land, we shouldn't let any of the other powers go." Blackhand and the other tribal chieftains' eyes lit up. When they first arrived at Azeroth, the tribe was completely clueless. They didn't know where they were, how many enemies they had, or where they were. Even though Ghoul, Dan emphasized the weakness of the enemies, and in reality, these weak enemies were no match for them. But the tribe was still in a state of ignorance about where to attack and how many people to send. After killing a lot of humans and seizing the maps, the chieftains finally learned more information. Now, Orgrim's suggestion had undoubtedly pointed them in a brighter direction. Chapter 168. There were hundreds of thousands of Horde warriors. There was no need for so many soldiers to take down this small human kingdom. Furthermore, Orgrim had already used his actions to find the enemy's weak point, the low city wall in the valley. Spreading out was also a way of survival for the beastmen since ancient times. Now that there was a shortage of food, there was no reason to gather so many soldiers here. The problem was, who was going to attack the dwarves? Creatures in the natural world often had the instinct to judge the strength of their opponents based on their size. The beastmen generally looked down on the short humans who only reached the beastmen's chests. Not to mention the dwarves who only reached the beastmen's waists. To the beastmen, getting rid of those dwarves who were not even comparable to beastmen children was a matter of minutes. Thus, the beastmen chiefs saw this as a lucrative position. For a moment, every chief's eyes were filled with eagerness. If he stayed here, he would receive a victory. Unfortunately, the chief Blackhand and the main force he led were here. This meant that the greatest glory and benefits would definitely belong to the Blackrock clan. The other clans could only follow behind and watch as the Blackrock clan ate the meat, while their own clans drank some of the meat soup. Going out was different. Risk? When was there no risk in survival? In our world, the beastmen called themselves Draenor. Every hunt was a fight with their lives on the line. In the eyes of the beastmen, risk was not a problem. Every chief unknowingly took a step forward. Blackhand squinted his eyes and used his limited brain capacity to think. Very quickly, the chief made a decision. Kilrog, I'll give you the glory of conquering Iron Furnace Castle. I hope your Bloodring clan can bring glory to our tribe. For the tribe, Kilrog Deadeye punched himself in the chest, causing a loud bang. The old orc hero's face was blazing with excitement. Blackhand turned around and looked at Grom Inferno, who had rushed over at the last moment before the dark portal closed. He roared, "Your Warsong clan will head north and conquer this kingdom called Torrential Stronghold. My Bloodhowl, has been hungry for a long time." Grom's lips curled up, revealing a bloodthirsty smile. Blackhand slammed the rough wooden table, instantly turning a corner into splinters. Other clans, prepare yourselves. We will directly cross the mountain and attack the eastern wall of Stormwind City. Blackhand and Orgrim's idea was a good one. Unfortunately, dreams were plentiful, but reality was harsh. The Horde spent 11 days getting the orc laborers to dig wells along the way to clear the obstacles in the way of the army's advance. Once again, Orgrim and the orc army behind him were dumbfounded as they traversed the mountains with ease. Blackhand grabbed Orgrim's neck and roared, "Is this what you meant by weak defense?" The city wall was still the same 5-meter-tall wall that blocked the orcs' view, but in front of the wall, not only were there many barbicans like the one outside the main gate of Stormwind City, but there was also a 5-meter-wide moat. Not only that, but there were also many huge mounds of earth behind the city walls. The flat tops of the mounds were filled with all kinds of catapults and ballistae. Dozens of arrow towers stood tall, and the javelin throwers on them could easily cover the area beyond the moat. Those green-skinned beasts must be dumbfounded. On the arrow tower, Noxus looked at the hesitant Horde army and laughed happily. Beside him, Lang also smiled sincerely. "It's all thanks to you, Duque. If it wasn't for your idea, we might have been finished." Duque shrugged. "It's nothing. The more people, the easier it is. You don't have to be humble. You're my lucky star." Lang smiled. A simple city defense could not withstand the orcs' flood of attacks. Therefore, as a transmigrator, Duque used the more people, the easier it is trick to deal with the orcs. It was simple. Those who were willing to dig the moat for the kingdom, as long as they dug enough earth, could get an early ticket to board the ship. The people went crazy. Everyone knew that Stormwind City could not hold on for much longer. The longer they stayed, the higher the chance of death. If not for the fact that they were surrounded and the sea was the only way out, the people would have rioted and fled on a large scale. Many people at the docks thought of ways and used up all their money just to get an early ticket. Don't talk nonsense like everyone was equal. The truth was that the more capable and the more capital one had, the more likely one could escape. Didn't they see that the nobles no longer had to go through the civilian docks? They could just board the new ships of the Stormwind Navy at the military port and easily escape from this desperate Stormwind City? But now, Duque's policy gave these pessimistic people new hope. As long as they worked hard, they could save themselves and their friends in advance. The conditions were not harsh. The laborers dug under the cover of the Stormwind soldiers who were ready for battle. Digging 20 standard carriages of earth could be exchanged for a ticket. A strong worker who spared no effort to work for a day or two could basically guarantee 3 to 4 tickets on the ship. Just like that, Duke did not even need to pay. With safety as a bargaining chip, he easily added hundreds of barbicans of various sizes around the eastern and northern walls of Stormwind City. Then he built a sluice gate and connected it to the canals within Stormwind City, creating a moat on the outermost perimeter of the outer walls. Although everything looked so rough and full of flaws, it was many times better than the original 5-meter-tall city wall. Duque looked at Edwin Van Cleef, who had deep dark circles under his eyes. He did not know if he had slept for more than 10 hours. Duque smiled warmly and patted Van Cleef's shoulder. "Good job, Edwin." "Master, you flatter me." Van Cleef hurriedly lowered his head. "I'll leave the transport ship, Sea God, to you and your stonemason. Pack your things and wait for me in South Shore." Van Cleef's eyes turned red. "Master." Duque stopped Van Cleef from continuing. "It's time to fight. That's not the domain of stonemasons. You go first. The Stormwind refugees near South Shore are still waiting for you to build a house." After hesitating for half a second, Van Cleef looked up. "But I'm a man too. I can fight too." Duque snickered. "How many orcs can you fight? If you want to act cool in front of Anduin Lothar, you should at least become a professional, right?" Van Cleef's eyes were red and filled with tears. "Go, your lovely Vanessa is waiting for you." Duque's words struck the softest part of the heart of this tragic hero who had risen up for the stonemasons. He suddenly knelt on one knee. "Thank you, Master." Chapter 169. At Stormwind Port, Van Cleef's eyes reddened when he saw the huge Poseidon ship moored in the harbor. There was a large sign on the dock that read, "Exclusively used by the Stonemason Guild, and Count Duque's personal guards." Count Duke Marcus' reputation had seeped into the hearts of every citizen of Stormwind. His courage, wisdom, fairness, benevolence, and greatness had almost become holy. People began to put his name alongside King Lang and Anduin Lothar. No matter where they were, the private guards of Count Marcus who wore the emblem of the 100-armed god of death would receive the most solemn treatment, equivalent to that of a knight. All the chaotic scenes would become orderly after the arrival of Duque's private guards. This was prestige. This was the people's spontaneous worship of Duque. While Van Cleef and the other stonemasons stayed behind to work, many wanted to sell their lives to Stormwind as the price for sending their families away early. Who would have thought that Duque would actually send them away? There was no way they would be killed when they were already dead. Before leaving, Makarov, the butler of Duque's external affairs, personally delivered the construction plans of the South Shore refugee camp. This made it clear to Van Cleef and his brothers that there were still many areas where they could be of use. "Here is the money needed to build the houses." Makarov's men carried over 50 chests of gold coins. If this is not enough, you can also use your signature to withdraw up to 300,000 gold coins from the Sea King Merchant Guild branch in Kurtiras and Menethil Port. "But does he trust me that much?" Makarov smiled. "Master Marcus said that he saw your eyes, and they told him that you are the kind of person who will do anything for the people, for your brothers, even sacrificing yourself. He believes in your character." 2 streams of tears flowed down his cheeks, and Van Cleef wailed like a child. Makarov patted Van Cleef's shoulder. "Do well. Master said that the rebuilding of New Stormwind will depend on you." Van Cleef looked up in a daze. "Will we retake Stormwind?" "I will. Because Master himself said, Stormwind City will be destroyed, but Stormwind City is destined to be reborn. Master Duke Marcus is synonymous with miracles. If he can't do it, who can? That's right. If Duque couldn't do it, who could? At the age of 14, he declared that he had surpassed the world guardian Mediv at that time. Before the age of 15, he had become one of the richest merchants in Stormwind and even the 7 human kingdoms. In the same year, he risked his life to follow Anduin Lothar to launch a surprise attack on Karazhan, sending the boss of the Burning Legion, Sargeras, into the bottomless abyss. Not long ago, he had summoned endless heavenly fire on his griffin alone, burning 100,000 orcs to death with a single fire. Well, it's necessary for publicity. Poor Darnielle was ignored, and the number of orcs killed in battle was exaggerated by 10 times. Anyway, when the orcs retreated in a hurry, Lothar asked his men to pick up thousands of charred orc corpses to show to the public, and the people decisively believed it. Who is the miracle? Duque himself was a miracle. For a moment, Van Cleef's heart was filled with blood. If you want to act cool in front of Anjouan Lothar, you should at least become a professional, right? Duque's words still echoed in Van Cleef's ears. Van Cleef clenched his fists tightly, and he made a decision. Become a professional. Not just a stonemason, but also a strong person to guard Master's side. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the cabin. This was a critical time. Makarov and Van Cleef immediately looked towards the direction of the sound. It was the direction of Stormwind's military port. Due to the needs of the war, the port had been constantly expanding. The northernmost berthing of the civilian port was already very close to the military port, so they could clearly see what was happening at the military port dozens of meters away. All of you, get off the ship. There's no extra space on the ship for filthy people like you. Seeing the filthy people that the noble was talking about, Makarov and Van Cleef's eyes widened. Those were the navy of Stormwind. Why were the owners of the ship being chased off? This is the Royal Navy's ship. The first mate on the ship waved his fist angrily. Not for now. The noble with the count's medal arrogantly raised his hand, and immediately a person who looked like a butler walked forward. Makarov recognized him. He was Count Christian Ferenc, whom Windsor had rescued from Karazhan a while ago. F***ck. He really F***king saved a scourge back. And he actually treated these scum like they were his king. At this moment, Makarov was cursing Windsor in his heart for being so meddlesome. Summon the Imperial Order of King Lang Rin. From the 8th of this month, Jacob is responsible for transporting Duke Ferenc and his personal belongings to South Shore. There was nothing wrong with the order itself. In fact, it was already a great gift from Lang to have the Navy ship free to transport the nobles. But the king's order was obviously amplified by someone. In order to transport more of their own people as well as their family heirlooms and valuables, the nobles actually threw the entire navy off the ship. The cabins that originally belonged to the navy were all filled with treasures, guards, servants, and maids. A navy officer suppressed his anger. Then your safety will not be guaranteed. I don't need you lousy temporary sailors. My men can handle this ship just fine. They are sailors with rich experience in long-distance voyages. The arrogance of the nobles was vividly displayed by Count Christian Ferenc at this moment. Bullshit. How can a navy ship be the same as a civilian ship? The navy's lungs were about to explode. But they did not dare to do anything. The one who came out was Count Christian Ferenc. But this count's father was the famous Duke Ferenc. At the peak of his power, the Ferenc family owned 1/5 of the Elven Forest as their territory. They were one of the oldest nobles in Stormwind. How will the ship come back? Jacob still has a mission to evacuate people from Stormwind in 5 days. Count Christian raised his chin and did not even lift his eyelids. Go to South Shore. I will order the soldiers there to bring the ship back. After saying that, he no longer paid attention to the naval officers and disappeared from the cabin, leaving only 8 fierce-looking guards lined up in a row, blocking the cabin entrance. Arrogant, condescending, and proud of being born noble. Why were there heroes like Anjouan Lothar and Duke Marcus among the nobles? And why is it full of scum like Christian Ferenc? Chapter 170. Although Edwin Van Cleef was young, and had not yet crossed the line between youth and middle age of 30, as a steward of the Masons' Guild, his soul had suffered setbacks countless times, over and over again. This was not the first time Edwin had tasted the arrogance and stinginess of the nobles. Perhaps he had spent a lot of money on a priceless stone sculpture, but refused to pay the rest because a butler said his lordship does not like it. In reality, the rest of the money was pocketed by someone, and the stonemason who had paid for the expensive materials fell into bankruptcy. When a request from the nobles came again, there was no way to refuse. Work or be persecuted to death. King Lang was wise and great. He was like the sun, giving light to the people. But there were places in the world where the sun could not shine, and the golden signboard of the nobles was the perfect prop. The nobles could wantonly exploit the people of the lower classes without paying any price. Edwin's extremely sensitive ears could still hear the voice coming from behind him. All citizens with valid tickets, listen up. Everyone is only allowed to bring no more than 10 pounds of personal belongings. Do not worry, everyone will be given enough bread and water every day from the time the ship sets sail to South Shore. In addition, the king has already prepared enough food for everyone in South Shore. Who did not have some beloved items? Limiting the amount of belongings they could bring was a helpless measure to transport more citizens. Everyone understood and understood. In this chaotic time of war, everyone was already very grateful to Duque and King Lang for such an excellent escape plan in the face of the crazy orcs. But when Edwin saw the personal belongings of the Navy officers being thrown out of the hold like trash, just to accommodate the hound favored by the nobles. When he saw that only the beautiful maids who were willing to be toyed with by the nobles could board the ship, and the old maids were heartlessly abandoned, crying their hearts out on the dock, Edwin Van Cleef still clenched his fists tightly, not even noticing that his nails dug deep into his palms and bled. The nobles were almost the masters of fate. Edwin had been pushed into the abyss of despair time and time again under the unreasonable manipulation of fate. That was until he met Duke Marcus, the miracle child who rose to the top of the kingdom's hierarchy with his astonishing talent, courage, and wisdom. He saw another clean stream in the kingdom other than Anduin Lothar. Unlike Lothar, he could be of use under Duque, and unknowingly, he had greater hopes for Duque. Would Duque finally grasp the power of Stormwind and sweep away the filthy aristocratic wind? He shouldn't be fantasizing, but Edwin couldn't help but wonder what would happen if Duque was in a high position. Edwin was still too young. His thoughts were practically written all over his face. Among Duque's subordinates, Makarov was never a talented fighter. However, as the leader of the mercenaries, the oldest Makarov had the most experience in dealing with people and observing their body language. Makarov saw through Edwin's thoughts in an instant. As he marveled at Duque's supernatural prophecy ability, Makarov moved his mouth close to Van Cleef's ear and spoke in a voice that only Van Cleef could hear. Master also said that fate will punish the weak, incompetent, and filthy. Edwin Van Cleef shuddered. Is Master Marcus hinting at something? He turned his head abruptly. Makarov, the old but shrewd count, had a "I didn't say anything" look on his face. Edwin suddenly had a feeling that Duque had prepared some sort of backup plan. Was he going to wipe out all the filthy and despicable nobles? What was he going to do? Was he going to act under the king's nose when the orcs were invading? After all, no matter how wise and great Clan was, he had never touched the interests of these nobles, let alone punish them. Everything Lang did was to improve the lives of the people outside of the traditional circle of interests of the nobles. But Master Duque, Edwin's mind was a mess. He knew that he was the backbone of Duque's faction, and Makarov was Duque's mouthpiece. There was no need for Makarov to lie to him. Did Duque see through his thoughts and want his complete loyalty? What kind of joke is this? What value do I have that the great Sea King would place so much importance on me? Van Cleef's head was about to explode. The only thing he knew was that if anything happened to these nobles during this escape, it would definitely have something to do with Duque. After sharing a shocking secret, the thrill of entering the core of Duque's power was like a strong wine being poured into his veins, giving Edwin a sense of excitement. Perhaps Duke Marcus really was the hero in his heart who could lead the people onto the path of greatness. Time passed quickly, and 2 hours later, the preparations for departure were finally completed. In fact, Van Cleef's ship was the first to set sail. A transport ship modified from a civilian merchant ship could not compare to a real warship in terms of speed or direction. Less than half an hour into the voyage, Van Cleef saw the warships loaded with nobles and expensive valuables easily overtake their transport ships, disappearing into the horizon in the short span of an hour. Van Cleef sneered as he watched the warships that had removed all the naval flags of Stormwind, leaving only the lion flag in place of the noble family's insignia. Night fell. The curtain of night receded, but danger was approaching the nobles in the early morning. After the morning mist dissipated, the blood sails that blotted out the sun could be seen in the distance. The private sailor in charge of the lookout was indescribably shocked. He couldn't react in time, and was stunned for a few seconds before he rang the alarm. Clang, clang, clang. Not good. Not good. It's the Bloodsail Pirates. The Bloodsail Pirates were a group of pirates formed by the rebel army led by Duke Varl. Their headquarters were in Stranglethorn Vale. As a group of pirates that used to be part of the Navy, the Bloodsail Pirates were extremely powerful. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if the nobles left the Navy behind, they might not be able to fight against the Bloodsail Pirates, not to mention that they had courted death by chasing all the Navy off the ship. Fear and uneasiness swept through the entire fleet like a freezing wind in a very short time. Countless nobles were awakened from their dreams by the alarm bell, and everyone's eyes were hazy. But after hearing the name of the Bloodsail Pirates, everyone's sleepiness was blown away. Impossible! This was the first reaction of all the nobles. Once they put on their clothes with the help of their maids and stepped out of the cabin onto the deck, their expressions froze in fear. Chapter 171. Impossible? This was the first reaction of the nobles. Oh no, this was their next thought. The long period of peace at sea had numbed them. They had even forgotten that there was such a thing as pirates. There were no pirates in Stormwind before because they were too poor. There were not many ships that occasionally arrived at Stormwind City. That kind of wealth could not attract large-scale pirates. What else was left in Stormwind City? What could a dozen fishing boats, which were not much bigger than a sampan, bring? As for Sea King Duque's Pearl Fleet, it was escorted by Naga. It was like a hedgehog, and anyone who touched it would be stabbed. It was different now. Most of the nobles who fled from the Elven Forest to Stormwind City brought with them the wealth that their families had accumulated for thousands of years. In order to carry as much treasure as possible on the limited cabins, the brainless nobles even subconsciously ignored the existence of danger, and even the original navy on the ship were thrown off the ship. In order to escape from Stormwind City as soon as possible, they did not even wait for the slow civilian transport ships. Otherwise, they could at least use them as bait to delay the Bloodsail Pirates. If this was on land, the nobles could more or less resist with their strong guards. Unfortunately, this was the sea. In all fairness, it was a miracle that most people who could not swim could exert 70% of their strength on a ship that was constantly shaking. Not to mention, the private sailors of the nobles were at most goods that ran merchant ships. This was really courting death. They could have courted death anywhere, but they just had to court death in a domain that they were unfamiliar with. Turn around and run. We'll be safe once we get back to the fleet. There are warships of Cultiras there. Duke Agath Ferens, who had rushed over after hearing the news, grabbed the captain's collar, his eyes bloodshot. Anyone could die. The noble bloodline could not be severed on this damned sea. There were also warships of Cultiras helping the fleet. Although those warships were also full of civilians, the warships were operated by the strong soldiers of the Kingdom of Sea. If they had to die, they could die by the Cultiras. It's too late, the captain cried. We're carrying too much weight. We're already overloaded, we can't run fast. Turn around and run. Throw away the things. Throw away the heaviest gold. Only by staying alive could the clan continue. What's the use of gold if I'm dead? The old duke's silver hair and beard danced wildly in the wind, his crimson eyes showing a rare sense of rationality amidst the fear. As the sails changed direction, more than 10 huge Stormwind warships began to draw huge arcs of white waves on the surface of the sea. Unfortunately, because there was no unified command, some of them had full rudders on the left, while others had full rudders on the right. The direct result was that the two ships almost collided head-on. Both sides were flustered and managed to avoid the worst situation of the bow collision at the last moment. Even so, the collision of the sides and the decorations on the sides of the two ships that brushed past each other scared the wits out of them. For a time, the scene was extremely chaotic. Trash! In the distant flagship of the Bloodsail pirates, a voice rang out. Brigadier General Lester Zank flashed a contemptuous smile, but when he saw the nobles starting to let their men drop a large number of heavy boxes to lighten the ship's load, he had a bad feeling. When he saw the golden light emitting from a box that disintegrated in mid-air, his bad premonition was confirmed. Lester could not help but curse, "Gold. It's all King Gold. You bunch of noble scum think you can run away just by throwing away the weights? Idiot, I don't want the ransom. I'll spend 3 days and 3 nights roasting the guy who came up with this rotten idea into charcoal." Lester almost fell into madness from anger. This was the King Deep Sea. Precious metals thrown into the sea could only sink to unreachable depths or become food for the fishes. How am I supposed to fish them out? Fire! Fire the bow cannon! Lester yelled at the top of his lungs. The first mate was dumbfounded. "Brigadier General Zank, we haven't entered the effective firing range yet. If we just use the bow cannon? Idiot, do you still expect that bunch of lousy land nobles to fight us in a gorgeous naval battle like Cultivate? I'm going to destroy their stupid idea of escaping." As the command flag fell, a dozen or so unglamorous parabolas set up a battle bridge in the faint light of dawn and began to erode the little courage of the nobles. The cannonballs, which were not intended to hit, landed near the noble fleet with ridiculously poor crosshairs, stirring up a huge column of water and creating a faint rainbow that surrounded the noble warships. From the nobles' point of view, this was already an overwhelming bombardment that was like a torrential rain. Then, something called probability theory, which was actually called metaphysics, came into play in the dark. In this era, the hit rate of long-range bombardment was extremely low. Unless it was within 100 meters, which was called close-range combat, the hit rate was mostly less than 1%. To be able to fire a cannon within a radius of 100 meters under the interference of a series of problems such as the strong wind, the trembling of the ship itself due to waves and other bombardment, and the maintenance of the barrel itself was already a godly gunner. To be able to hit a target with one shot was simply a legend. But one guy really did it. From afar, a curved cannon from the bow of a ship 800 meters away blasted directly into the armory of a noble's warship, causing a brilliant chain of explosions. When the warship exploded, the flames that soared into the sky, the wood shavings that were blown away and kept spinning in the air, as well as a large number of human limbs. Everything was like a horrifying oil painting from hell, deeply imprinted on the retinas of the nobles. In less than a minute, as many as 7 noble warships stopped their ships and raised their white flags high up. More Bloodsail pirate ships, which had been designed for extreme speed, rushed into the nobles' fleet and immediately launched a close-range bombardment against the nobles' private sailors who attempted to resist. Bang, bang, bang. The well-trained Bloodsail pirate ships fired continuously from bow to stern, teaching the nobles' private soldiers a good lesson on what a naval battle was. Of course, the nobles' private soldiers retaliated with cannons. It was a laughable salvo. Lester, who was watching the battle from afar, was stunned. He did not expect these private soldiers, who had only sailed merchant ships before, to be this retarded. The huge counterforce even pushed the entire ship 5 meters to the other side, as if it was moving horizontally. The cabin, which could not withstand the impact, even let out a typical cry of wood breaking. But all resistance was futile. The pirates bit their machetes and jumped over the cable that they had prepared. Everything was going smoothly, but when they killed their way into the enemy's cabin, there was a sudden change. A huge devil appeared. The clothes hanging on his chest even retained the noble's family emblem. Chapter 172. A kilometer above the sea west of Stormwind City, Lothar and his Griffin Knights followed Duque's Griffin and flew at high speed. Is the news true? When my Naga sent me the news, I informed you and His Majesty Lang immediately. We have to hurry, or we'll have to collect the corpses of those guys. When he heard Duque say that the nobles' fleet had been attacked, there was a moment when Lothar instinctively suspected that Duque was the one behind it. The reason was simple. As the upstart of Stormwind City, Duque had always been at odds with the traditional nobles. Even the Brando family, which had a direct conflict with Duque in the past, had never shown any signs of reconciliation on any formal occasions. Even if they wanted to stab you in the back 1,000 times and insert steel needles into each of your fingers, the nobles would still maintain their elegance and demeanor in front of others. If it weren't for the blood of Thoradin the Great and the friendship of Lang, Lothar might have long been killed in a dark corner of Stormwind City, and his corpse would have rotted away. Although Lothar trusted him, he could never see through Duque. At such a tense time, there was no need for Duque to lie to him and Lang. Instead, he fabricated an attack on the nobles to lure him away. Lothar had no choice but to save the nobles. After all, among all human kingdoms, the nobles were known as the cornerstones of the country. In fact, there was even a saying in the upper class of many kingdoms: the useless peasants can die, but as long as there are wise and brave nobles, the country can be revived even if it's destroyed. Lothar did not want to save them, but he had no choice. Anduin and Duque were the only cards that Lang could play. Duque, aren't your Nagas supposed to escort the fleet? Please, I only have more than 100 Nagas and a few thousand useless Murlocs. Please, this route is nearly 1,000 nautical miles long. How much territory do you expect to guard? But I've asked them to hurry. But looking at the schedule, we should arrive first. The attack on the nobles' fleet was indeed a blind spot for him and all of the upper echelons of Stormwind. Rather than saying that it was a blind spot, it was more accurate to say that the orcs' attacks were too powerful and attracted all of their attention. Just by imagining it, one would know that such a weak guard was loaded with the wealth of the noble families for thousands of years. It would be abnormal if it did not attract the attention of pirates, right? Noxus didn't say anything and followed Duke silently with over 30 Griffin Knights. Duque didn't take any detours. He went straight to the scene. That was an hour after the battle between the Bloodsail pirates and the nobles' fleet. The situation was so chaotic that Lothar didn't know what was going on. More than 20 Bloodsail pirate ships surrounded the battle in the middle, not daring to approach. From what Duque knew, these guys were already undead when he saw them. If Ralph Drugel could use the Paladin Sanction skill, he should be the father of Jules Drugel, the deputy mayor of Twilight Forest's Night Town. Duque knew about this as soon as he came out of Karazhan. He did not believe that these guys, who were supposed to be one of the bosses, could escape from Karazhan full of demons and scathe. Duque took the opportunity to get close to a few of them. Just like when Duque used the system elf to discover that there was something wrong with Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras. In his retina, he saw the boss template of these guys, with the word demon attached. Duke was laughing so hard that his belly almost burst. That's right, these demons were part of the insurance that Duque had set up. It could ensure that even if one day a great detective was so resourceful and found evidence of his collusion with the Bloodsail pirates, Lang would not blame him for this matter. The demons were led in by the nobles themselves. Who could be blamed for leading the wolf into the house? Perhaps it was because of this that Stormwind wanted to cover up this disaster of, most of the kingdom's nobles are demons. In the end, perhaps this was a murder that had once been treading on thin ice. If one part went wrong, the reputation that Duque had worked so hard to build would no longer exist. But after Duque carried out the perfect murder, to the end, he could establish a perfect ending that was beneficial to the whole kingdom and even all of humanity. When the goal was achieved, the truth of this murder would never need to be exposed. Chapter 173. The demon was very powerful. It was so powerful that even the warriors recognized by the nobles couldn't shake it. Even a slap that couldn't even be considered a formal attack could smash a person's head into a rotten watermelon. A dog-like demon with 4 feet on the ground opened its huge mouth and swallowed the entire person, along with the armor and the weapon in his hand. The horrifying teeth that sounded like millstones grinding the body and metal, as well as the guards' dying wails, lingered in his ears. After seeing such a scene and hearing such a sound, just the thought of facing such a thing made their hands and feet tremble uncontrollably. It just so happened that such a thing was actually transformed by his dearest family member. The huge demon didn't just spread its massacre towards those damned bloodsail pirates, it also extended its claws of death towards those who were originally on the same side. It didn't differentiate between friend and foe, and killed as it pleased. This was simply a nightmare. This kind of nightmare seemed to be endless. Resistance was meaningless, and all who resisted had been crushed to dregs. There was also no point in running because the two ships were only so big, and there was nowhere to run. Every survivor was a pitiful wretch waiting in despair for the final judgment to come. At this moment, a shining holy existence descended from the sky. Looking up blankly, he recognized that it was the radiance of arcane power unique to mages. A powerful mage? Who could it be? After almost forcibly conscripting all the private mages of the nobles, Stormwind still suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Magic. The Storm Kingdom's Wang clan's mage squad only existed in name. There were only a few high-ranked mages still active on the front lines. Obviously, it was the one that the nobles didn't want to see the most, Sea King Duke Marcus. The mortal enemy that the nobles would never reconcile with had become their greatest savior. This had to be said to be ironic. Of course, this was only for the nobles that were still alive. Not even 1% of the nobles that were still alive now. It was very simple. The demons from Karazhan could easily develop believers among these people whose hearts had been corrupted, and even directly turn them into demons. A pure soul was the most powerful line of defense. Even the leader of the Burning Legion, Sardras, had to spend decades to completely corrode Mediva's soul. It was still an incomplete version because at the very end, Old Mike still jumped out and gave CO Sam a big explosion. But when it came to nobles with pure hearts, Duque chuckled. Not every noble was qualified to be a paladin, and not every noble was named Bolvar for dragon. When the pirates arrived in front of the nobles, most of the nobles were desperately protected by their guards and gathered together. When the pirates' butcher knives saw the necks of these nobles that had actually become devils, the devils naturally jumped out and revealed their true bodies. In such a crowded situation, how many people could survive if the demon directly bloomed in the middle of the crowd? Anyway, when Duque landed on the ship, he did not see any nobles surviving. Oh, surviving in human form. Duque, Marcus, it was a roaring blast of air that was like a raging storm and a huge wave. Well, Duque couldn't hear it clearly, so he used his little finger to pick his ear. Did someone just call me? Bastard, you are. It's all your fault. Facing this more than 3-meter-tall mutated demon with a typical blue demon guard body and a nondescript human head, Duque was dismissive. Duque snorted coldly, and suddenly a huge piece of ice rose under his feet, raising Duque's body like a high platform. In the blink of an eye, Duque was already standing on a 2-meter-high platform. This way, he could look down on the demon. Ah, sorry, you're too short, I didn't see. You're presumptuous. The demon suddenly pounced. You're the presumptuous one. Suddenly, a mysterious blue magic circle appeared in front of Duke, and a powerful, arcane impact turned into a huge fist, and the demon that was charging at him was pushed back even faster than when it came. Bang bang bang. The demon that crashed into the cabin knocked over a lot of things, but the demon quickly climbed out again. Oh, it's you, Sir Fame Brando. We haven't seen each other for more than half a year. How come you've grown uglier? Under the watchful eyes of dozens of survivors on the deck of the two ships, Duque mercilessly mocked the demonized Fame Brando. I'm going to peel off your skin and make it into a carpet. Fame roared and charged again. But this time, he didn't charge recklessly. His two claws were glowing with a black light. Unfortunately, the gap was too big. Fame Brando, who had been driven out of the Storm Royal Magic Academy by Duque, had also missed the Dalajan recruitment last year. As a result, before becoming a demon, Sir Brando was still at the level of a magic apprentice. Demons were also divided into different levels. The more powerful in existence was the more powerful it would be after it became a demon. How strong could a guy like Fom, who had wasted half a year, be? Putting aside the fact that Duque was already a sky mage, even if Duque was still an earth mage, he could still easily beat him up. 12 hands of magic appeared and shot out arcane missiles. For Fom, it was like a storm. Puff, 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 everyone was dumbfounded. In their eyes, that unparalleled, terrifying demon was nothing but a punching bag in Duque's hands. Every arcane missile could easily blast a muscle on Brando's arm or thigh into pieces. The number of bullets that flew past Brando's body was the same number of holes or gaps that appeared on his body. Less than 10 seconds. Brando had become a human stick. Oh no, a demon stick. His limbs were all broken, and there were terrifying holes the size of a human's fist on his body. Every hole was spewing out bluish-purple demon blood. Even so, Brando was still alive. Rolling on the ground in pain, wriggling his wounded body like a worm, Fame Brando could not stop laughing. In the end, you're just as dirty as me. What saint who saved the world? What hero who fought against the orcs? Aren't you just like me, filled with vengeance and hatred? I despise hypocrites like you the most. I know you won't let me go, so I'll wait for you in hell. Suddenly, a huge ice coffin wrapped around Brando, ending this demon's life. Looking at the burning warships in the distance, Duque muttered to himself, I just killed a demon, but this demon happened to be called Fame Brando. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.